She had $43 in her purse, a restaurant bill for $216, and a boyfriend who had just walked out the door without looking back. The entire dining room had gone quiet. Not the polite quiet of people minding their own business, but the electric, hungry quiet of people waiting to watch someone fall apart. Emily Carter stood at that table, receipt in hand, and felt the walls closing in. She didn't know that the man 2 tables away had been watching for the last 20 minutes. She didn't know he was worth $4 billion. She didn't know that in about 60 seconds he was going to change her life in a way she never asked for and couldn't afford to refuse. If you've ever been left behind by someone who was supposed to stay, this story is for you. Watch until the end, like this video, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The restaurant was called Maison Éclat, and it had the kind of name that made ordinary people feel like they'd already made a mistake just by walking through the door. It sat on the 42nd floor of the Hartwell Tower in downtown Chicago, wrapped in floor-to-ceiling glass that looked out over a city blazing with autumn lights. The tables were dressed in ivory linen. The silverware was polished to a mirror shine. The menu had no prices, which, Emily had learned exactly once in her life, meant you were supposed to already know they were obscene. She had known. She had known from the second Daniel suggested the place, grinning at her over his phone screen like he was doing her a favor. But she'd said yes anyway, because Daniel had a way of making her feel like caution was the same thing as smallness. Like the most responsible thing she could do was stop being so afraid all the time. That was the last lesson Daniel Park ever taught her, and it cost her $216 she didn't have. It had started as a celebration, or at least that's what he'd called it. 3 weeks earlier, Emily had landed a contract position at a mid-sized marketing firm called Prism Group. It wasn't glamorous. She wrote copy for product launches and handled social media calendars for brands that sold things like ergonomic desk pads and vitamin supplements. But it paid $22 an hour, and after 8 months of freelancing gigs that barely covered her rent in the Wicker Park apartment she shared with 2 roommates, it felt like a lifeline. Daniel had taken her out for drinks that night. He'd kissed her on the cheek and told her he was proud of her. He'd also, now that she thought about it, made her pay for the drinks. She'd been with him for 7 months. He was 34, worked in private equity, and had a condo in Lincoln Park with heated floors and a barista-grade espresso machine that he'd used exactly twice. He wore cologne that cost more than her grocery budget. He talked about financial positioning and asset liquidity the way other people talked about the weather, like it was just the natural backdrop of a life. Emily had told herself she loved him. What she'd actually loved, she suspected now, was the feeling of mattering to someone like him. The way he'd walk into a room and put his hand on the small of her back, and she'd feel just for a second like she belonged somewhere she never thought she'd get to be. She was 30 years old. She'd spent those 30 years working hard, worrying constantly, and pretending she wasn't doing both. Her mother, Patricia, lived in a 2-bedroom house in Rockford with a leaking roof and a heart condition and a stack of medical bills that Emily sent $50 toward every month because that was all she could manage. Her younger brother Marcus was 24 and brilliant, and working nights at a fulfillment warehouse because the art degree he'd earned hadn't opened the doors he thought it would. Emily had grown up understanding that love was real, but money was the thing that actually protected people. The two had never seemed to occupy the same space in her life. Not at the same time, not without cost. Tonight was supposed to be different. Daniel had made a reservation. He told her to dress up. He texted her that afternoon, "Wear the blue dress, you look incredible in it." So she'd ironed the blue dress, the one she'd bought at a consignment shop on Milwaukee Avenue for $16, and she'd done her makeup in the bathroom mirror while her roommate Sophia talked about her own relationship drama, and Emily had thought, maybe this is the turn. Maybe this is when things start to go right. She'd taken the L train because she didn't own a car. She'd arrived at Maison Éclat at 7:45, exactly on time, and Daniel had been standing at the bar, not waiting exactly, but existing in the space with the easy confidence of a man who had never been uncomfortable anywhere. He'd looked at her, smiled, and said, "You look nice." Not incredible. Nice. She hadn't let herself read into it. The dinner had been fine at first, pleasant even. The food was extraordinary, the kind of cooking that made you forget you couldn't afford it. They'd ordered appetizers and a bottle of wine that Daniel had chosen without consulting her, and that, she'd realized later, cost $90 on its own. He talked mostly about himself, about a deal he was working on, about a guy at his firm who was an idiot, about a trip to Lisbon he was thinking about taking in the spring. He hadn't asked about her job. Not once. Around 9 o'clock, he'd excused himself to use the restroom, and Emily had sat there in the glow of the table candle and thought, "This is it, isn't it? This is the whole thing. Dinner with a man who doesn't ask questions and thinks nice is a compliment." She'd been thinking about how to have that conversation, the one she'd been postponing for weeks because she hated conflict, and she hated the look people got when she tried to say something real. When her phone lit up, a text from Daniel. "Hey, something came up. Had to head out. Split the bill? Venmo me half. Sorry." She read it 3 times. She looked at the empty chair across from her. She looked at the half-finished wine bottle. She picked up her purse, opened her wallet, and counted what she had. $43 in cash and a debit card with $62 in the account, which she couldn't use here because she needed it for Monday's train pass and her share of the utilities. The bill, when the server placed it on the table with the practiced neutrality of someone who had seen this before, read $216.40. The server's name was James. He was maybe 22, with a carefully blank expression that Emily recognized as professional sympathy, the kind that cost him nothing but kept the peace. "Take your time," he said, which was both kind and completely useless. "Thank you," Emily said. She sat very still for a moment. The restaurant hummed around her. Conversations floated past. Laughter, the clink of glasses, the low rumble of a pianist working through something by Bill Evans in the corner. No one was looking at her. Not yet. She thought about calling her roommate Sophia, who would absolutely lend her money and would also absolutely never let her forget it. She thought about calling Marcus, who had nothing. She thought about her credit card, which was $400 over its limit, and locked in a drawer in her apartment because she'd cut up the physical card to stop herself from using it. She opened Venmo and stared at Daniel's name for a long moment. Then she closed the app. She wasn't going to pay him back for wine she hadn't ordered at a restaurant she hadn't chosen, for a dinner he'd abandoned. She wasn't doing that. But she also could not pay this bill. And in about 90 seconds, James was going to come back, and the manager would eventually be called, and there would be a scene in one of the most expensive restaurants in Chicago, and Emily would be the woman in the consignment shop blue dress who couldn't cover her dinner. The humiliation of it sat in her chest like a stone. "Think," she told herself. "You're smart. You're resourceful. You've handled worse than this." She hadn't, actually. Not quite like this. "Excuse me." The voice came from her left, quiet, direct, no performance in it. Emily turned. The man standing beside her table was tall, not in a showy way, but the kind of height that came with a certain stillness, like he was used to taking up space without having to prove it. He was wearing a dark charcoal suit with no tie, collar open one button, and he had the kind of face that was handsome in a slightly irregular way. Jaw too sharp, eyes set a little too deep, a faint scar above his left eyebrow that someone had never bothered to explain. He looked like he was 32, maybe 33. He looked like someone who slept well but didn't always remember to eat. He was holding 2 glasses of wine. "I think there may have been a mix-up," he said, and his voice was the kind of calm that meant he'd thought about what he was going to say before he said it. "The restaurant made an error with the billing. Your table's covered." Emily stared at him. "I'm sorry?" "Your check." He set one of the wine glasses down on the table in front of her, easy and unhurried, like they were old friends. "It's been taken care of." She looked at the glass. She looked at him. She glanced across the room and saw James watching from a discreet distance, expression still carefully blank. "That's not true," she said. The man's mouth curved, not a full smile, more like the beginning of one that hadn't made up its mind yet. "No," he admitted, "it's not." "So, what is actually happening right now?" He pulled out the chair across from her, Daniel's chair, and looked at her with a question in it. She didn't say no, so he sat down. "Logan Hayes," he said. She knew the name. The way you knew the names of hurricanes and Supreme Court justices, peripherally, factually, without personal context. Logan Hayes was the founder and CEO of Hayes Global, a technology and real estate conglomerate that had made him one of the wealthiest men in the country by the time he was 28. She'd seen his face in a magazine once, in a waiting room somewhere. He'd been photographed at some industry event, unsmiling, standing in front of a building he apparently owned. He looked younger in person and more tired. "Emily Carter," she said, because it seemed like the thing to do. "I know," he said. "You work at Prism Group. You've been there about 3 weeks. Your LinkedIn says you specialize in brand narrative and content strategy." He paused. "I'm sorry. That sounds more alarming than it is. I'm here with a business associate who apparently knows someone who worked with you. The name came up. Right before or right after you decided to cover my bill?" "After," he said. "The bill part was, I saw what happened. I'm not going to pretend I didn't." Emily felt something tighten in her chest. She didn't want his pity. She particularly didn't want his pity delivered with nice wine in a restaurant like this, where the humiliation already had a kind of theatrical quality. "I'm not offering charity," he said, and his tone shifted just enough to make her stop. "I'm offering a transaction. There's a difference." She looked at him for a long moment. "What kind of transaction?" He picked up his wine glass, turned it once in his hand, not drinking, just thinking. The candlelight caught the lines of his face and softened them slightly. "I have a problem," he said. "A business problem. It's significant enough that I've been trying to solve it for 3 months, and nothing has worked. The nature of the problem is that it requires a specific kind of solution, not a professional one, a personal one." He set the glass down. "I need someone to play the role of my fiancée for approximately 6 months." The table went quiet between them. Emily said, "You're joking." "I never joke at business dinners." "This isn't a business dinner." "It is now," he said. She looked around the restaurant again, half expecting this to make sense if she looked at it from a different angle. It didn't. Why would you need someone to pretend to be your fiancé?" "Because there is a multi-billion-dollar international partnership currently in negotiation, and the lead investor, a very traditional, very specific kind of man, has made it quietly but unmistakably clear that he prefers to conduct long-term business with people who have stable personal lives. He's old money European. Family matters to him in a particular way." Logan's voice stayed level, factual. "I'm a single father. I have a daughter. I've been alone for 4 years. In his worldview, that reads as incomplete." "That's absurd." "It is," he agreed, without any particular heat. "It's also real." Emily turned her wine glass in her own hands. The wine was excellent. She knew because she'd spent 2 hours at dinner not quite saying what she meant, and the wine had been one of the only things that actually did what it was supposed to. "How much?" she said. Something crossed his face. Not surprise exactly, but a recalibration, like he'd expected her to ask more questions before she got to that one. $500,000, he said, paid in stages, 100 at signing, 100 at the 3-month mark. The final 300 when the contract terminates, which would be at the announcement of the partnership closure, or at 6 months, whichever comes first. You'd have access to a company card for any expenses related to the arrangement. There would be a contract specifying the terms, your rights, and the limits of the arrangement. Emily put the wine glass down very carefully. $500,000. Her mother's medical bills were $62,000. Her brother's student debt was $48,000. Her own debts, credit card, a personal loan she'd taken to cover a gap between jobs 2 years ago, the money she still owed Sophia from a bad month last winter, added up to just under $23,000. That was $133,000 standing between her family and a version of life that didn't involve constant, grinding fear. $500,000 would change everything, not just the debts. Everything. Her mother could fix the roof. Marcus could stop working nights. Emily could build something, actually build it, with a foundation underneath it instead of just hoping the ground didn't give. She thought about Daniel, somewhere on the other side of the city, Venmoing her his half of the dinner he'd walked out on. She thought about the woman she'd been 2 hours ago, standing at this table with $43 and a closing feeling in her chest. "You'd want me to move in," she said. "It would need to be convincing. There would be social obligations, events, family gatherings, meetings. My daughter is 8. She would meet you, that's—" He stopped. "That part is the most important consideration. She's not a prop in this arrangement. She's my daughter and her life doesn't get disrupted." "I understand that." "I don't think you do yet," he said, And it wasn't unkind, but it was honest. Lily has been through things I'm not going to explain in a restaurant on the night we've met. She's careful with people. She takes her time. You'd have to respect that. Actually respect it, not perform it. Emily thought about this. What's she like? Logan blinked, like the question caught him sideways. Smart, he said after a beat. Stubborn. Loves dogs, hates loud noises, reads everything she can get her hands on. She went through a phase of memorizing state capitals and would recite them at dinner whether or not anyone asked. The corner of his mouth moved again. That almost smile. She's still doing it, actually. What's the capital of Wyoming? Cheyenne, he said, without hesitating, and then looked mildly startled at himself. Emily almost laughed. She stopped herself, but only just. If I agree to this, she said, and I'm not saying I do, the arrangement is professional. I'm not... She paused, tried to find the word that was both accurate and not humiliating. I'm not available for anything beyond what's in the contract. Understood, he said immediately. That's not what this is. And I have a job. I'd want to keep it, or at least keep the option of keeping it. Reasonable. And I'd want to talk to a lawyer before I sign anything. I'd expect nothing less. She sat with it for a moment. The restaurant went on around them. The pianist, the conversations, the soft percussion of a city that didn't know or care what was happening at this particular table. Why me? She said. You're Logan Hayes. You could find someone. I don't want someone from my world, he said, and the directness of it was startling. Someone from my world would have an agenda. They'd want something I don't want to give, or they'd talk, or they'd make it into something it isn't. I need someone who has a clear, finite reason to want the money, no social overlap with my circle, and enough intelligence to hold the role without coaching. He looked at her steadily. I've been in this restaurant for 2 hours. I watched you handle a genuinely terrible situation with more composure than most people I employ manage in board meetings. You asked the right questions tonight, not the ones most people would ask. Emily looked down at the tablecloth. I'm going to need a few days to think about it, she said. Of course. And I have a condition of my own. He waited. My mother, she said, she has a heart condition. She needs a procedure. Her doctor has been recommending it for 8 months, but she can't afford it, and the insurance won't fully cover it. It's urgent. Whatever payment structure we use, I need to be able to access enough to cover that before anything else. Something shifted in his expression. It wasn't pity. It was more like recognition. The particular look of someone who understood that some things couldn't wait for contract timelines. We can structure it so the first payment covers that immediately, he said. Within the week. She nodded once. I'll have my attorney reach out to you tomorrow, he said. You'll have 5 days to review the contract and consult your own counsel before you're asked for any decision. All right. He stood then, buttoned his jacket with the automatic ease of habit, and looked at her one more time. For what it's worth, he said, what happened tonight? The man who left. That was his failure, not yours. Emily looked up at him. You don't know that, she said. No, he agreed, but I've met enough people to make a reasonable guess. He left $240 on the table, the bill plus a 20% tip, exact, and walked back toward the bar without looking back. Emily sat alone at the table for a long moment. She drank the rest of the wine he'd left. Then she put on her coat, gathered her bag, and walked out into the Chicago night. The L train 3 blocks away, her apartment 40 minutes north, her phone buzzing with a Venmo notification from Daniel that she didn't open. $500,000. Her mother's name was Patricia, and she'd been sleeping badly for 8 months because of a pain in her chest she described as nothing to worry about. Emily walked to the train with her hands in her pockets and her eyes straight ahead, and she thought about the look on Logan Hayes' face when she'd asked him what his daughter was like. The way something had moved across his expression that wasn't performed and wasn't calculated. Just real. Smart, he'd said. Stubborn. She thought about the scar above his eyebrow. She thought about the way he'd said she's not a prop in this arrangement, like it had already occurred to him that someone might think of her that way, and he'd needed to say it out loud to make sure it never happened. She got on the train. She found a seat by the window. The city moved past in orange and gold and the particular gray of October in Illinois. She took out her phone and opened her contacts and scrolled to the name Marcus. He picked up on the second ring, his voice scratchy with the tail end of a night shift. Hey, he said. How was the dinner? Daniel left, she said. A pause. He texted me from the bathroom and walked out, left me with the bill. Emily. Marcus's voice went flat with the specific kind of anger that younger siblings produce when someone wrongs the person they love most. Tell me where he lives and You'll do nothing because you're 24 and you live in Rockford and you have work in 6 hours. She looked at the city lights moving past the window. I need to ask you something, and I need you to just listen for a second and not react until I'm done. Okay. She thought about how to say it. She thought about Logan Hayes and his exact $240 and the way he'd said it's a transaction, not charity. How would you feel, she said slowly, if everything changed? Another pause, longer this time. What kind of changed? She pressed her forehead against the cold glass of the train window and watched Chicago scroll past in the dark. The kind, she said, where Mom gets her procedure and you don't have to do nights anymore and She stopped. The kind where we're not scared all the time. Marcus was quiet for a moment. She could hear him breathing. That kind of changed? He said finally. Yeah. Then I'd say... His voice had gone softer. I'd say I'd feel like maybe things were going to be okay. She closed her eyes. Yeah, she said. Me too. She called the attorney's office on Wednesday morning and set the appointment for Thursday afternoon. She didn't sleep well on Tuesday night or Wednesday night, which was how she knew she was going to say yes, because the things that kept Emily Carter awake were never the things she was walking away from. They were always the things she was moving toward. The contract was 34 pages. Her attorney, a woman named Gloria Rice, whom Sophia had recommended and who wore her silver hair in a severe bun and had a voice like a verdict, read all 34 pages twice and told Emily it was, remarkably, quite fair. He's not trying to own you, Gloria said in her verdict voice. He's trying to employ you. There's a meaningful difference here. You have exit clauses. Your privacy is protected. The payment structure is documented and binding. She paused. I'd ask for a car. A car? You'll need transportation for this arrangement. Ask for a car allowance. Something modest so it doesn't look like you're mining him, but ask. Emily added the car allowance. Logan's attorney accepted it within 2 hours. She signed the contract on Friday morning, October 14th, in a conference room on the 48th floor of the Hayes Global Tower, with Gloria Rice on one side of her and a view of the lake on the other. Logan was there. He wore a gray suit, different from the charcoal one, and he shook her hand across the conference table like she was a new business partner, which, technically, she was. The first payment will clear this afternoon, he said. Thank you. My housekeeper, Rosa, will help with the move this weekend. Whatever you need. I don't have much, she said, which was true, and which she said without embarrassment, because embarrassment at this point seemed beside the point. Something moved across his face, that same recalibration from the restaurant, like he kept expecting her to be a different kind of person and kept finding she was exactly this one. Saturday morning, then, he said. I'll have Lily with me. She knows we're having a guest. A guest, Emily said. For now. The almost smile. She'll ask you about state capitals within 10 minutes. I'd prepare. I'll study, Emily said. And she did. Friday night, in her apartment, packing her things into 2 duffel bags and a box that her roommates helped her carry down the stairs, she looked up state capitals on her phone and made Marcus quiz her over the phone until she could answer without pausing. She didn't know. Packing those 2 bags in that apartment that smelled like coffee and other people's laundry, that she was packing for a life she couldn't yet picture. She thought she was packing for 6 months, a transaction, a job with unusual terms. She didn't know about the loneliness she'd find behind all that money. She didn't know about the 8-year-old who would sit across from her at breakfast and ask, completely without guile, "Do you like my dad?" She didn't know about the documents she'd find in a desk drawer 3 months later, or the dinner that would change everything, or the moment in a hotel corridor in Geneva where Logan Hayes would look at her and she'd understand, finally, what it cost him to feel things. She knew none of that on Friday night in October. She just knew that her mother's procedure was scheduled for November 3rd, and that the first payment had cleared at 4:15 that afternoon, and that she had enough. For the first time in a very long time, she had enough. Saturday morning came gray and cold, the kind of Chicago fall that means business. Emily stood outside the Hayes mansion in Lincoln Park with 2 duffel bags and a box of books, and felt, for just a moment, like a person standing at the edge of a place they'd never been and couldn't quite map. The house was large without being aggressive about it. Red brick, bay windows, a front garden that had clearly been tended by someone who actually cared about it. A carved pumpkin sat on the front steps, slightly lopsided, like it had been carved by someone who was better at enthusiasm than execution. The front door opened before she knocked. A girl stood in the doorway. She was small for 8, wiry, with Logan's dark hair and a pair of glasses that were slightly too large for her face and had clearly been chosen by a person who wanted to look serious. She was wearing a sweater with a fox on it and holding a book with her thumb still marking her place, like she'd been interrupted mid-page and intended to get back to it as soon as possible. She looked at Emily for exactly 4 seconds, assessing. "You came from the city," she said. "I did," Emily said. "What's the capital of Montana?" Emily had studied. "Helena." The girl's eyes narrowed slightly, recalibrating. "Most people say Billings." "Most people are wrong." Something very small and very careful moved across the girl's face. Not a smile yet, more like the possibility of one, held in reserve. "I'm Lily," she said. "I know," Emily said. "I'm Emily." "I know," Lily said, in the same tone, and stepped back from the doorway. Logan appeared behind her, coffee in hand, in jeans and a dark sweater, the most human Emily had seen him look. He glanced from his daughter to Emily and back again, with the specific expression of a man who was used to expecting the worst and was mildly unsettled by the absence of it. "Come in," he said. Emily picked up her bags. She crossed the threshold. The door closed behind her, and somewhere in the house, something that had been very still for a very long time began, almost imperceptibly, to move. The first morning in the Hayes house, Emily woke up at 6:14 and lay still in the dark for a full minute before she remembered where she was. The room was large and quiet, in the way that expensive rooms are. A particular kind of silence that comes from good insulation and thick curtains and the absence of anything broken. Her apartment in Wicker Park had a radiator that knocked at 3 in the morning and a neighbor who came home late on weeknights and sometimes talked to himself in the hallway. She'd slept to those sounds for 2 years. They were irritating and familiar, and she missed them the way you miss something you didn't know you needed until it was gone. She got up, found the bathroom, and stood in the shower for too long under water that stayed exactly the temperature she wanted without her having to adjust anything. Even the shower felt like a statement. By the time she came downstairs, Lily was already at the kitchen table eating cereal and reading a book with the focused intensity of someone diffusing a bomb. She didn't look up when Emily entered. Rosa, the housekeeper, a compact, efficient woman in her 50s with a manner that suggested she had seen everything and was not particularly impressed by any of it, poured Emily a cup of coffee without being asked and slid it across the counter. "Mr. Hayes leaves at 7:15, Rosa said. "He drinks his coffee black, doesn't eat breakfast during the week unless someone puts food in front of him, which I do. Miss Lily needs to be at school by 8:30. Her backpack is always by the door. She will tell you she doesn't need help. She does, occasionally, but she won't admit it." "I heard that," Lily said, without looking up from her book. "I know," Rosa said, and handed Emily a plate of toast. Logan appeared at 7:13, jacket on, phone already in hand, moving with the energy of a man whose day had started 2 hours ago internally, even if his body had only just arrived in the kitchen. He stopped when he saw Emily at the counter. "You're up," he said. "I'm up," she agreed. He poured his own coffee. Rosa watched this with the long-suffering patience of someone who had given up on certain battles, and stood at the counter reading something on his phone. The kitchen was big enough that they weren't in each other's space, but small enough that the silence between them had a texture. "There's an event Thursday evening," he said, without looking up. "Quarterly review dinner for some of our major investors. It'll be the first time you meet most of them in this context. I'll have my assistant send you a briefing document." "Okay." "It'll be formal. If you need anything for the—" He stopped, seemed to consider how to finish that sentence without it being strange. "For the wardrobe side of things, there's a card in the folder Rosa gave you. Use it." "I brought things," Emily said. He looked up then. The look wasn't unkind, but it was direct. "These people will be assessing you. I'm not saying that to be cruel. I'm saying it because it's true, and you should know it going in." What kind of assessing? The kind where they're trying to figure out if you're real, he said. Not a real person. They'll see that immediately. Whether you're real for me. Whether it makes sense. He set his phone down. You can borrow anything from this house that makes the story more convincing. That's not charity. That's logistics. Emily thought about Gloria Rice in her verdict voice. He's trying to employ you, not own you. I'll look at the briefing, she said. He picked up his phone again, finished his coffee standing up, kissed the top of Lily's head. Lily made a small noise of protest without looking away from her book, and was out the door at exactly 7:15. The kitchen went quieter without him in it. Lily turned a page. He does that every day, she said. Does what? Leaves at 7:15, exactly. She turned another page. He set an alarm for 6 months after my mom left so he'd have time to say goodbye to me before school. He still uses the same alarm. She said it the way children say things that are heavier than they know, plainly, without armor, trusting the world to receive it carefully. Emily stood very still with her coffee cup. That's a good alarm to keep, she said. Lily finally looked up at her over the top of her glasses. The assessing look again, but different from yesterday's, less suspicious. What's the capital of New Hampshire? She said. Concord. Lily nodded, slowly, like Emily had passed some kind of secondary screening. Then she went back to her book, and Emily drank her coffee, and the morning light came through the bay windows and fell across the kitchen floor in long, pale rectangles. And somehow it didn't feel as strange as it had 60 seconds ago. That was the first morning. They got harder before they got easier. The Thursday dinner was everything Logan had said it would be, and a few things he hadn't. 22 people in a private dining room at a restaurant downtown, the kind of place where everything was mid-century and the lighting was designed to make people look important. The investors were mostly men, mostly over 50, with the polished, careful affect of people who had spent decades being right about money and expected to go on being right. Their wives, and that they were mostly wives, a fact Emily noted without comment, were a different kind of careful. They looked at her with interest that was covered over by politeness, which was more unsettling than open scrutiny. Logan had sent the briefing document on Tuesday, and it was thorough enough to be slightly alarming. Names, backgrounds, professional histories, personal details where relevant, preferred conversation topics, things to avoid. Emily had read it 3 times, made notes, and then felt vaguely like she was preparing for a multiple-choice exam on people she hadn't met. She'd worn the black dress she'd bought with the card, not expensive-looking in a way that felt like trying, just quiet and well-cut. Gloria would have approved. Rosa had said yes, that one, which was even better. Logan met her at the door of the restaurant. He'd taken a car, she'd taken a separate one, because arriving together from the same address felt, somehow, like a level of intimacy neither of them had quite calibrated yet. He looked at her when she walked up, a quick professional assessment, and said, "Good," which was not a compliment exactly, but was something. "Ready?" he said. "No," she said honestly, something that was almost a smile. That's the right answer. The people who say yes have never done anything worth being nervous about. They walked in together, and Logan's hand went to the small of her back, light, practiced, the gesture of a man who had made it before. Emily didn't tense. She'd told herself not to, and for once, her body listened. The first hour was a performance, and they both knew it, and they were both good at pretending they didn't. Logan introduced her with the easy confidence of a man who was used to being the most important person in a room and had decided to share that distinction. Emily smiled, asked questions, listened with the focused attention she'd spent years developing as a professional and deployed now as a personal survival skill. An older man named Arthur Whitfield, who had the bearing of someone who had been powerful for so long he'd forgotten it was ever otherwise, took her hand and said, "How did you manage to get through to this one?" "We'd given up on him." "I caught him in a generous moment," Emily said. Arthur laughed. Actually laughed, with his whole chest. "I've known Logan for 8 years," he said. "I've never seen a generous moment. You must have done something right." She felt Logan tense slightly beside her, almost imperceptible. She put her hand on his arm lightly and said, "He was generous before I could talk him out of it. After that, he was just stuck." Arthur laughed again. Logan looked at her sideways, and she could feel him recalculating something. The dinner itself was fine. The food was excellent, the conversation predictable, and Emily moved through it with the specific focus of someone doing a job. which she was, technically, though it felt more personal than that by the time they were an hour in. She caught herself genuinely listening to a woman named Claire Whitfield, Arthur's wife, a former architect, talking about a restoration project in Barcelona, and forgot for 20 minutes that she was performing anything at all. On the drive home, Logan sat beside her in the back of the car and said nothing for a while. The city moved past. Rain had started sometime during dinner, and the streets were wet and bright. "Arthur liked you," he said finally. "Arthur likes anyone who laughs at his jokes." "He doesn't actually, he's testing them." Logan was looking out the window. "You said the right thing." "I said an honest thing." "It was also the right thing." "Sometimes those are the same." He turned to look at her. In the dark of the car, his face was harder to read. The shadows filled in the parts that were usually guarded and left only the underlying structure of it. "Where did you learn to do that?" he said. "Do what?" "Read a room that fast." Emily looked at her hands. "I grew up in a house where reading the room wasn't optional," she said. "When money is tight and someone comes home tired and you've done something that can go either way, you learn very quickly how to figure out what you're walking into." She paused. "It's not a skill I asked for." He was quiet for a moment. "No," he said. "I suppose not." They didn't talk for the rest of the ride, but it was a different kind of quiet than the one they'd started with. Not the silence of two strangers, but the silence of two people who had just told each other something small and true, and were still deciding what to do with it. The arrangement had been in place for 3 weeks. It was going to be 6 months. Emily looked out at the rain and told herself to remember that. She didn't quite manage it. The rhythm of the house established itself the way rhythms do, not through planning, but through repetition. Emily kept her job at Prism Group, working remotely from a corner of the study that Rosa cleared for her without comment, commuting in twice a week. Logan left at 7:15 every morning and came back between 6 and 8, and the variable depended on factors that Emily gradually learned to read. When it was closer to 6, something had gone well. When it was closer to 8, it hadn't. Lily had school until 3:30, and Rosa picked her up on Mondays and Wednesdays. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, Emily started picking her up because it had happened accidentally the first time. Rosa had a conflict, Logan was unavailable, and Emily was the only person in the house. And then Lily had told her father about it at dinner with a casualness that suggested she'd found it acceptable, which in Lily's economy of expression was equivalent to a standing invitation. "She mentioned something about a library trip," Logan said to Emily the following Tuesday morning. "She wants to look at the new nonfiction section. She's very serious about it." She's 8. She's 8, and she read a book about migratory bird patterns last week and is now deeply concerned about climate policy. "I'd take the library seriously." Logan rubbed the side of his face. He did this when something surprised him, and he was trying to process it without showing the surprise, a tell so consistent she'd already cataloged it without meaning to. "Fine. Library's on Orchard. She knows the way from school." "I know," Emily said. "She already told me." He looked at her again with that recalibrating expression. She was starting to recognize it as a form of something he wasn't ready to name yet, a kind of reluctant reassessment, performed on himself, about what he'd assumed this arrangement would be. The library trip happened, and then happened again the following Thursday, and then became the thing that Lily asked about on Monday mornings. Emily didn't examine why she looked forward to it. Lily had opinions about everything, about the organizational logic of library shelving, about whether certain authors were overrated, yes, several, about a girl in her class named Petra who had told her that reading too much would give her headaches, which Lily had dismissed with a precision that made Emily quietly proud. They talked during those drives. Real talking, not the careful, calibrated kind that Emily did at investor dinners, but the disorganized sideways kind where you end up somewhere you didn't expect to go. Once, sitting in the library parking lot because Lily had gotten to the end of a chapter and needed 90 more seconds, Lily said without looking up from her book, "Do you think people can be happy alone?" Emily considered this. "I think some people can," she said. "I think some people think they can but are actually just good at being busy." Lily turned a page. "My dad is good at being busy." Emily didn't answer that. "He wasn't always," Lily said. "When I was little, before, he used to do different things. He taught me card tricks. He was bad at them." She paused. "He still does them sometimes, only when he thinks no one's watching." "Card tricks?" "He drops the cards, every time." Lily finally looked up, pushed her glasses up. Don't tell him I told you. He thinks he's getting better. He's not. Definitely not. She got out of the car with her library books and her backpack and didn't look back, which Emily had come to understand was Lily's version of comfort. She walked ahead, but she always walked toward. The fourth week brought a family obligation Logan had mentioned once, briefly, with the tone of a man reporting a minor natural disaster. His mother, a woman named Constance Hayes, who lived in a townhouse in Gold Coast, held a monthly Sunday dinner that Logan attended with the faithful, slightly grim reliability of someone who had made peace with the terms of their own family. It's fine, Logan told Emily the Saturday before. She'll ask questions. Just stay close to the story. What is the story? That we met at a charity event 4 months ago and things moved quickly. He said it without inflection, like he'd rehearsed it enough that it had stopped meaning anything. That's thin. I know. What charity event? He blinked. I didn't... If she asks, what event? What month? What was I wearing? What did we talk about? Emily held up a hand. I'm not criticizing. I'm saying we should actually know the story. Logan sat down at the kitchen table, which was something he rarely did when he didn't have food or a laptop in front of him. He put his hands flat on the table and looked at her with an expression that mixed frustration and grudging respect in roughly equal parts. March, he said. The Sullivan Foundation Gala. You were wearing... He stopped, thought, looked at her. Green. Something green. Green dress, yes. What did we talk about? Books, he said, and it came out slightly surprised, like he'd arrived at it without intending to. Books works, Emily said. It's specific without being verifiable. She pulled out a chair and sat down across from him. And tell me about your mother. What does she actually want from these dinners? Logan exhaled slowly through his nose. She wants to see Lily. She wants to believe that I'm not, that things are okay, that I'm okay. He paused. After Claire left, she worried about me more than I wanted her to. I kept telling her I was fine. Were you? No, he said simply, and then seemed mildly surprised that he'd said it out loud. They looked at each other across the kitchen table. I'll handle your mother, Emily said. You just handle being a person instead of a CEO for one afternoon. I'm always a person. Logan, you shook hands with your daughter's school principal last week. A silence. She initiated the handshake, he said. She's 9 years old and she weighs 60 pounds. She has a very confident handshake. But the corner of his mouth was doing the thing again. The almost smile that he kept reining back in, like he thought it would give something away. Emily pushed back her chair. Sunday, green dress, Sullivan Foundation Gala, March. You told me you'd read the same book twice without realizing it, and I told you that was either a sign of a very good book or a very distracted person. He was quiet for a second. Which did you say it was? I said both could be true at once. She stood up. Good night, Logan. She was halfway out of the kitchen when he said quietly, Emily. She turned. He was still sitting at the table, hands still flat on the surface, looking at her with an expression that had no calculation in it. No strategy, no briefing document. Just something tired and honest and too unguarded to have been planned. Thank you, he said, for being good at this. It was such a careful thing to say, such a deliberate way to say something that had other words available to it. It's what I'm here for, she said, which was also careful, and also had other words available to it. She went upstairs. She lay in the dark for a while before she slept, listening to the house settle around her. The particular sounds of a home that had been well built and well kept, full of expensive silence and small absences. Sunday dinner at Constance Hayes' house was a 3-story townhouse on a tree-lined street that smelled like old money and leaf decay in the October air. Constance herself was a compact, elegant woman in her late 60s with Logan's dark eyes and a manner that was simultaneously warm and forensic. She hugged you and assessed you with the same motion, and you only knew which one had happened when she stepped back. She looked at Emily for exactly the amount of time it took to decide something. You're prettier in person than in the photograph, she said. You've seen a photograph? Emily said. One of the event photographers from the Sullivan Gala posts everything online. I found it in August. She said it without apology. You were talking to him about something. He was listening. He doesn't always, Emily said. Constance smiled, a real one, quickly controlled. No, he doesn't. She held Emily's hands for just a moment, turned them over once in the way of women who communicate everything through touch, and then let go. Come in. Lily's already upstairs fighting with the bookshelf. The afternoon was not the disaster Logan had been bracing for. It was something more complicated and, in its way, more difficult. It was real. Constance's house was full of photographs, all of them evidence of a life that had included love and loss in the usual quantities. There was a photograph on the piano of a younger Logan, early 20s, laughing at something off camera, that Emily stopped in front of for a moment without meaning to. He laughed more then, Constance said from behind her. What happened? Constance was quiet for a beat. Things that weren't entirely his fault, but that he decided were. She picked up the photo, looked at it, set it down. He blamed himself for a long time. He still does, a little, for choosing the wrong person, for not seeing it sooner. Emily looked at the photograph. The laughing man who had become the careful one. Who was she? Emily said. That's his story to tell, Constance said. If he ever does. She looked at Emily with the direct, unhurried assessment she'd been deploying since the door. He doesn't talk about it. He doesn't talk about much that matters. But he's in this kitchen listening to you right now through the wall, and he's been facing this direction for the last 10 minutes. Emily didn't look at the kitchen doorway. You're imagining things, she said. I'm a mother, Constance said. I never imagine anything. She patted Emily's arm. Come eat. The drive home was quiet at first. Lily fell asleep in her car seat 20 minutes out, book still open on her lap, face peaceful in a way it almost never was when she was awake and thinking. Logan drove with one hand on the wheel and the city going dark around them. She liked you, he said after a while. Constance? She doesn't like most people. I know, she told me. He glanced at her briefly. What else did she tell you? That you listen more than you used to and laughed less. He was quiet for a moment. She worries. She loves you, Emily said. It looks like worrying from the outside. He didn't answer that, but his hand shifted on the wheel, a small readjustment, and his shoulders settled by maybe half an inch. The physical equivalent of something acknowledged without being spoken. They drove through the dark city with Lily asleep between them in the back seat and the rain starting again off the lake. And Emily thought about the photograph on the piano and the laughing man in it, and about the way Constance had said he blamed himself with the specific sadness of someone who had spent years being unable to fix it. She thought, there is a whole story here that I don't know yet. She thought, I'm not sure I should want to know it. But she did want to know it, and that, the wanting, was the thing she should have paid more attention to in those early weeks when everything was still clean and defined, and the contract was 34 pages of clear terms. It was the 5th week when the first crack appeared in the careful professional surface they'd both been maintaining with the diligence of people who needed it to hold. It happened on a Wednesday evening. Logan came home at 8:15, later than usual, later than the threshold that meant something had gone badly. He came through the back door into the kitchen where Emily was eating leftovers Rosa had left and working on copy for a Prism group campaign on her laptop, and he stopped at the counter and stood there for a moment without saying anything. She looked up. He had the look of a man who had been hit somewhere that didn't show and was pretending he hadn't been. There's food, she said. I'm not hungry. There's food anyway. She got up and plated the leftovers, a chicken thing with rice, nothing fancy, and set it on the counter beside him and went back to her laptop. She didn't ask. She'd learned in 5 weeks that asking Logan Hayes direct questions about what was wrong produced either deflection or a careful, bloodless summary that told you the facts without telling you anything real. He ate standing up, which she'd also learned was his default. Sitting down for food implied a kind of settled contentment that he didn't quite trust himself to claim. After a while, he said, One of the subsidiary deals fell through, cost us 8 months of work. I'm sorry. It's money. It's fine. Okay. It's not fine, he said, and his voice came out differently, rougher at the edge, less managed. It's 8 months, and I should have seen it coming, and I didn't. And 2 people on my team will have to be reassigned because the project is dead and it's... He stopped, put the fork down. I'm sorry. This isn't your problem. You can be annoyed in your own kitchen, Emily said, without looking up. You don't have to apologize for it. He was quiet. How long has it been since you talked to someone who didn't need something from you? She said. He didn't answer. She looked up. Logan? A while, he said. That's not sustainable, is it? It's been 4 years. I'm still here. Present doesn't mean sustainable. She closed her laptop. What would you have done with those 8 months if the deal had gone well? He frowned. The work was not about the work. If it had succeeded and you'd had those 8 months back, what would you have done with the extra space? He looked at her for a long moment, like the question was a room he hadn't been in before and wasn't sure he was allowed into. Taken Lily to see the Grand Canyon, he said finally. She asked about it in August. I said maybe next year. He paused. I've been saying maybe next year for 2 years. Emily looked at him. Book it, she said, next spring. Book it now, before you decide something else is more urgent. Spring is 6 months away. Yes. He understood what she meant. She saw it cross his face, the arithmetic, the contract, the 6-month calculation. The Grand Canyon trip would be after. You should still book it, she said. She'll still want to go, and you should still take her. He picked up the fork again. He finished the food. He put the plate in the sink and rinsed it. Another thing she'd noticed, that he always rinsed his own plate, which was not what she'd expected from a man with 4 properties and a net worth in the billions, but which she'd come to think was maybe the most reliable thing about him. Emily, he said. Were you always like this? This direct? She thought about it honestly. No, she said. I used to soften everything. I was very good at saying things sideways. I got tired of it somewhere around 27 and stopped. She picked up her laptop. It's more efficient. It's alarming, he said. That's also efficient, she said. Good night. She went upstairs. She did not look back, but she was smiling by the time she reached the top of the stairs, and she stopped there for a second, in the dark of the hallway, and told herself to be careful. She told herself this the way you tell yourself not to think about a word and then can't think about anything else. By week 6, she had stopped counting weeks. This wasn't a decision so much as a failure of vigilance. The contract was still a fact, the terms were still clear, and Emily was not a person who ignored facts or terms. But the texture of the days had changed in a way that made week counting feel like something you did from a distance, and she wasn't at a distance anymore. She was in the house. She was in the mornings and the library Thursdays, and the dinners where Rosa left food and Logan came home looking like he'd been carrying something all day and couldn't quite put it down. She was in Lily's questions and Constance's sharp, careful love. And the card tricks, she'd seen one, finally, on a Sunday evening when Logan thought she was still upstairs. He'd been practicing at the kitchen table, alone, and he'd dropped the cards, exactly as Lily had said, and he'd made a sound that was 90% frustration and about 10% a laugh he hadn't decided to have yet. She'd backed up the stairs without making a sound. She'd sat on her bed and looked at the ceiling and thought, "You're in trouble." She was 30 years old, and she was not naive, and she had signed a 34-page contract, and she was absolutely, undeniably in trouble. She called Marcus that night. "How's it going?" he said. "Fine," she said. "Mom's procedure went well. The roof estimate came back. They can start in February." "M. What?" "How's it going? Not the logistics, the actual it." She was quiet for a second. "It's complicated." "Complicated like a job or complicated like a person?" She lay back on the bed and looked at the ceiling. "I don't know yet." Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then, "Is he good to you?" She thought about the rinsed plate and the alarm at 7:15 and the way he'd said thank you at the kitchen table with nothing strategic in his expression. "He doesn't know how to be," she said. "He's trying to learn." "That's either really good or really bad." "I know, Emily. I know, Marcus. He exhaled. "Just don't lose yourself in it, whatever it is." She looked at the ceiling. "I won't." She meant it. She genuinely meant it. She just didn't account for the fact that sometimes, when you think you're keeping yourself intact, you're actually quietly becoming someone new. Someone who wants different things than you used to, who sees rooms differently, who understands, in a slow and irreversible way, that the distance you've been maintaining is not the same as safety. It just feels like it. For a while. For a while it feels exactly like it. The Geneva trip was supposed to be 4 days. It became 5 when the lead negotiator for Hartman and Voss, the European conglomerate at the center of the multi-billion-dollar partnership Logan had been building toward for the better part of 2 years, extended the preliminary discussions by 24 hours and requested, with the careful indirectness of a man who communicated everything important through implication, that Logan bring his fiancée to the closing dinner. Logan told Emily this on a Tuesday morning in the kitchen, standing exactly where he always stood with his coffee and his phone, except this time he put both down before he spoke, which she'd learned meant something. "Geneva," she said. "Thursday through Monday now. I know it's fine. I'll clear my schedule at Prism." She turned her coffee cup in her hands. "Who is he, the lead negotiator?" "His name is Heinrich Hartmann. He's 71, third generation of the family that built the company. He studied at Oxford, lives outside Zurich, has been married to the same woman for 43 years. Logan picked up his phone, set it down again. "He's not difficult. He's just specific." "Specific how?" "He makes decisions about people first and business second. If he doesn't trust the person across from him, the deal doesn't happen regardless of what the numbers say." He looked at her evenly. "He asked about you specifically. His assistant called mine." "What did he ask?" "Whether you'd be at the dinner? Whether you were—" Logan paused, and something moved across his expression that she couldn't immediately categorize. "Whether you were the kind of woman who understood what her partner had built." Emily held the coffee cup and thought about this. "Do I?" she said. "Do you what?" "Understand what you've built." He looked at her. The morning light was doing its thing with the bay windows, laying pale rectangles across the kitchen floor, and in that light he looked like a person instead of a CEO, which was not something she'd taken for granted. "Better than most people who've been here longer," he said. She nodded once. "I'll need the full file on Hartman, not the briefing summary. The whole file. And I want to talk to you, properly, before we get on the plane." She stood up. "You should know that when I walk into that dinner, I'm going to say true things. I can only work with what's actually there." He was quiet for a second. "I know. Does that worry you?" He thought about it. "No," he said, and it came out like he meant it. They flew out Thursday morning. Lily was with Constance, which she accepted with a calm that suggested she'd decided to be okay with it. She'd handed Emily her library card before they left and said, with great seriousness, "You can borrow it if you need something to read on the plane." Emily had taken the card and kept it in her jacket pocket for the entire flight. Geneva was gray and cold in early December, the kind of cold that came off the lake with a specific European authority. The hotel was a 19th century building near the Old Town, all dark wood and high ceilings, and their suite had 2 bedrooms separated by a sitting room, which Logan had arranged before Emily needed to ask. The first evening was a working dinner with 3 of Logan's senior partners, 2 men and a woman named Diana Yoon, who ran Hayes Global's international division, and who looked at Emily with the calm, measuring gaze of someone who was very good at her job and assumed nothing. Emily liked her immediately. Diana pulled her aside after dinner, briefly, while Logan was talking to the others. "He hasn't brought anyone to a work trip in 4 years, Diana said, without preamble. "I know," Emily said. "Is this—" Diana stopped, seemed to decide something. "Never mind. It's not my business." "You were going to ask if it's real," Emily said. Diana looked at her. "Is it?" Emily held her gaze. "That's a complicated question." "Most honest things are," Diana said, and went back to the table and didn't bring it up again. The Hartman dinner was Saturday evening. In the days between, Logan worked and Emily read through the files he'd given her. Not just Hartman, but the full history of the partnership negotiation, 2 years of documents and meeting notes and proposal drafts that told the story of something Logan had been building with extraordinary care and extraordinary patience. She found herself reading late into the nights, in the sitting room between their bedrooms, while the city went quiet outside. She read not because she'd been asked to, but because she wanted to understand it, wanted to understand what this represented, what it had cost him, what he was asking the world to trust him with. On Friday afternoon, she knocked on his bedroom door. He answered in shirt sleeves, jacket off, papers spread on the desk behind him. He looked at her. "I have questions," she said. "About the dinner? About the partnership? About what it actually means?" She leaned against the doorframe. "Not the financial terms. The rest of it. He stepped back from the door, and she came in and sat in the chair across from his desk, and he sat down, and they talked for 2 hours. Not briefing document talking, real talking, the kind she'd had to work for over 6 weeks and was only now getting with any regularity. He talked about what Hayes Global was trying to build with the Hartman deal, which was not just a financial arrangement, but a model, sustainable development infrastructure across 4 countries, the kind of long-cycle investment that required trust between partners because the returns took a decade to materialize. He talked about it the way she'd only heard him talk about one other thing, his daughter. "You care about this," she said at some point in the second hour. "It's my company." "That's not why you care about it. Plenty of people run companies they don't care about." She looked at him. "You care about what it can actually do." He was quiet for a moment. "When I was 24, I watched a development project fail in a neighborhood my mother grew up in. Not because the plan was bad, because the people funding it stopped trusting each other and walked away." He picked up his pen, put it down. "The project failed in March. By October, 3 businesses on that street had closed. I know because my mother told me." Emily held this. "That's why you need Hartman," she said. "Not just the money. His family has been in this for 3 generations. He doesn't walk away." "He never has," Logan said. "In 40 years, not one incomplete project." He looked at her with a directness that had something open in it. "That matters more to me than the valuation." "Then that's what I'll say tomorrow night," Emily said. "That's the true thing." He looked at her for a long moment. In the lamplit room, with the Geneva cold pressing against the windows, and his papers spread between them, he had the expression of someone encountering a thing they'd almost stopped believing existed. "All right," he said. She got up to go, and was at the door when he said, "Emily." She turned. "The woman you mentioned. When you told me about reading the room, the house you grew up in." He was looking at the desk. "Was it very bad?" She thought about how to answer that honestly. "It wasn't bad. It was hard. There's a difference." She paused. "My dad left when I was 12. Not dramatically. He just stopped coming back. My mother worked 2 jobs and didn't complain about it, and I think that was harder to watch than if she had complained. The silence of someone being strong for your sake." She looked at the door. "It taught me that people can want more for you than they let on. It also taught me that wanting isn't the same as having." She felt him listening behind her, the quality of his attention, the way she'd felt it at that first dinner in Maison Éclat. "Good night, Logan," she said. She went to her room and lay in the dark and listened to the city and thought about 43 years of marriage and legacy projects and a man who'd never walked away from something he'd committed to. She thought about what it cost to be that kind of person. She thought about Logan at 24, watching a neighborhood crumble because trust between 2 people had failed. She thought about the contract. 34 pages, clean terms, finite duration. She thought about the way he'd said, "all right." She fell asleep eventually, and in the morning she found a cup of coffee outside her door, still hot, with no note. The Hartman dinner was at a private residence 20 minutes outside the city, a house set back from a road that ran alongside the lake, the kind of place that didn't need to impress anyone because it had already decided what it was. Heinrich Hartman was a tall man who had probably been taller once, with white hair and a face that had spent 71 years being honest and looked like it. His wife, Elsa, was small and sharp-eyed, and put her hand on Emily's arm within 30 seconds of meeting her, which Emily took as a good sign. There were 8 people at dinner. The conversation moved in 3 languages, which Logan navigated with a facility that surprised Emily until she remembered the file notation. Fluent in French and German, uses it strategically. She didn't have German or French beyond tourist phrases, but she had the thing she'd always had, the ability to sit at a table and make the people around her feel like what they were saying mattered. Hartman watched Logan across the table. Not intrusively, the way an experienced judge watches a courtroom, taking in everything with the patience of someone who had learned that the important thing was never what people said first. Elsa asked Emily, at some point in the second course, how she had come to understand Logan's work. "I didn't at first," Emily said. "He showed me. Not in presentations, in the way he talks about it when he's not trying to." She looked at Hartman, who was listening. "I think the things people care about most are the ones they talk about badly, too much, or in circles, or with their hands." She paused. "He uses his hands when he talks about the long cycle projects." Hartman looked at Logan. Logan looked at Emily. She looked at neither of them, kept her eyes on Elsa, and continued. I grew up in a house where money was the thing that protected people, or failed to. I know what it means when an investment doesn't complete. It's not a line item, it's a street, a school, a business someone spent 10 years building. She set down her fork. He knows that too. It's why this partnership matters to him the way it does. Not the return. The thing the return makes possible. The table was quiet for a moment. Hartman said in English to Logan, You explain this to her. She read the files, Logan said. The files don't say that, Hartman said. He looked at Emily. That came from somewhere else. From paying attention, Emily said. Elsa made a small sound that might have been a laugh. The dinner continued. The conversation found its way back to business, and Logan and Hartman talked with the particular fluency of two people who had been circling each other for 2 years and were finally in the same room in a way that felt honest. Emily watched it happen. Watched the moment, somewhere in the third course, when Hartman's manner shifted by a degree that only someone paying close attention would have caught. The slight relaxation across the shoulders. The direct question instead of the oblique one. She had done something here. She could feel it without being able to name it exactly. Not manipulation, not performance, but something more like translation. Taking the true thing and putting it in a room where it could be heard. After dinner, when the other guests were gathering in the sitting room, Hartman found her by the window. Your mother's well? He said. She didn't know how he knew about her mother. She supposed men like Hartman knew most things. Better, she said. She had a procedure in November. She's recovering. He nodded. My own mother, he said, worked in a textile factory outside Bern until she was 60. My father's first factory. He looked out at the lake. He never forgot where the company came from. I have tried not to either. He turned to look at her. It is a rare quality. To remember where you come from when you are standing somewhere like this. Emily looked at the room behind her. The old furniture, the portraits, the accumulated weight of 3 generations of things built and held. I don't think I could forget, she said, even if I wanted to. No, he said. I don't think you could. He looked across the room at Logan, who was talking to one of the other guests and was, Emily noticed, facing in her direction. He is a careful man, Hartman said. Careful men take a long time to trust, but when they do not waver. He paused. It is a good thing to be trusted by someone like that, and a significant responsibility. He moved away before she could answer. She stood at the window for a moment. Careful men take a long time to trust. The drive back to Geneva was quiet at first. Logan sat beside her in the car with the look he got when something had gone well, and he was processing it in the careful, private way he processed everything. Not celebrating, just settling into it, letting it become real at its own pace. After a while, he said, You told them about your mother. Hartman already knew. He knows a lot of things. A pause. You didn't have to tell him what it meant. The street, the school. You didn't have to. It was true, she said. It was the truest thing I could say about why the work matters. I wasn't going to not say it because it was personal. He was quiet for a moment. Outside, the lake slid past in the dark. Claire would have, he said. It was the first time he'd said her name. Emily went still. Would have what? She said carefully. Not said it. The personal was a liability in her view. Something to be protected, not offered. He was looking out the window. She was very good at rooms like that. Better than almost anyone I've ever worked with. She could read a table and tell you within 10 minutes what everyone wanted and how to give it to them. He paused. I thought that was the same thing as what you did tonight. It's not the same thing. Emily kept her voice neutral. What's the difference? He turned from the window and looked at her. She was managing the room, he said. You were just in it. The car moved through the dark. Emily thought about Constance saying he blamed himself. She thought about the photograph on the piano. How long were you together? She said. She expected deflection. She expected the careful, bloodless summary. 3 years, he said. We met when Lily was 2. She was good with Lily at first. Lily liked her. He stopped. When I found out about the business side of it, the professional betrayal, that was survivable. I'd built the company back from worse. But Lily, his voice didn't break. It just went quieter. Lily had started calling her by a name, not Mom, something in between, her own word for it. He was looking at his hands now. When she left, Lily asked me where she'd gone, and I didn't have an answer. I still don't have one that's actually good enough. Emily sat with this for a long moment. What did you tell her? That some people aren't ready to stay, he said, which is, he exhaled. It's not enough, but it's honest. It's both, Emily said. Those things can be both. He looked at her. In the moving dark of the car, the thing that was usually managed in his expression had gone quiet. Not absent, but quiet. The way a house goes quiet when everyone in it has finally stopped pretending to be somewhere else. The business side, Emily said carefully. What happened? He was quiet for a long time, long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. She was working with a competitor, he said. Had been for 8 months before I found out. Information she'd taken from my company. Nothing criminal, she was careful about that, but enough to cost us 3 major contracts and 2 years of development work in the European market. His voice stayed level. Flat. The voice of a man who had told this story to himself so many times that all the edges had been worn down. The same European market I've been trying to rebuild for 4 years. Emily understood then. The full shape of it. The Hartman partnership wasn't just a business deal. It was the completion of something that had been broken by a specific person who had stood where Emily was standing now. A restoration. A proof. Did you know, she said, before the end? Did you suspect? No, he said. That's the part I can't forgive myself for. I'm supposed to be good at reading people. It's the thing I'm actually good at, and I missed it completely. He looked out the window again. For 8 months, she sat across from me at dinner and told me about her day, and I believed her. She was good at rooms, Emily said. Yes. That's not your failure. That's hers. I know that, he said. I know it intellectually. It doesn't. Knowing a thing and feeling a thing are different problems. She thought about herself saying exactly that to Marcus, once, about a different situation and a different kind of loss. Knowing isn't the same as having. Logan, she said. He looked at her. What you built tonight, what we built, I suppose, that's yours. That didn't come from what she broke. It came from what you've been putting back together. She held his gaze. I think Hartman knows that. I think that's why he extended the trip. He looked at her for a long moment. The car was turning back into the city now, the hotel lights visible ahead. You're not what I expected, he said. It wasn't quite a compliment. It was more honest than a compliment. It was the thing itself. You've mentioned that, she said. I mean it differently now. She didn't ask how. She didn't need to. She could feel the difference. It had been changing shape for weeks, accumulating in small moments she hadn't let herself name. The coffee outside her door, the way he listened, the card tricks he didn't know she'd seen. They got back to the hotel and said goodnight in the sitting room between their rooms, standing a few feet apart with the lamp making its small circle of warmth and the city dark outside. The files, he said. You didn't have to read all of them. I know. Why did you? She thought about what Hartman had said. It is a significant responsibility. She thought about the true thing and what happened when you put it in a room where it could be heard. Because it mattered, she said. The work mattered. You mattered. She said it plainly, without architecture around it. That's all. He looked at her. She went to her room. She sat on the bed and looked at the wall and listened to the city. She thought, you are so far past trouble. She was past the thing where she could tell herself to be careful and have it mean anything. She was past the distance that had felt like safety in week 1. She was somewhere else now. Somewhere uncharted. Somewhere the 34-page contract had not anticipated, and she didn't know yet what it would cost her or what it would become. She only knew that he'd said you mattered back at her with his silence, and his silence was the loudest thing she'd heard in months. In the morning, Hartman's attorney called Logan's attorney. The partnership was moving forward. Logan knocked on her door at 7:45 with 2 cups of coffee and said, "It's done." And his voice had in it the particular quality of a man who has been carrying something for a long time and has just, for a moment, been allowed to set it down. She took the coffee. She said, "I know." He looked at her across the doorway with the lamp-lit room behind him, and the Geneva morning going gray outside, and said nothing. She had learned by now that the things Logan Hayes didn't say were the things he meant the most. She was learning to speak that language. It scared her how naturally it was coming. They flew home on Monday afternoon. Lily was waiting at the house with Constance, sitting at the kitchen table with a book and a plate of cookies she had clearly supervised the production of, because they were slightly burned on the bottom, and Constance only burned cookies when Lily was involved. Lily looked up when Emily walked in. "How was it?" she said. "Good," Emily said. "Cold." "Did you need my library card?" Emily took it out of her jacket pocket and set it on the table in front of Lily. "I kept it with me the whole time." Lily looked at the card, then at Emily, then back at the card. The assessing look again, but there was something different in it now, something that had been held back for 8 weeks and was now, slowly, cautiously, considering whether to move closer. She picked up the card, slid it in her book as a bookmark, and said, "Dad burned the toast this morning. Constance had to make more." "I can hear you," Logan said from the doorway. "I know," Lily said, and turned a page, and the kitchen filled up with the particular warmth of people who are still figuring out what they are to each other and doing it anyway. 3 days later, Emily found the folder. It was not hidden. That was the thing. It wasn't hidden at all, just sitting in the bottom drawer of the desk in the study where she worked, the drawer that had always stuck when she tried to open it, and which she'd finally forced open on a Tuesday afternoon because her stapler had rolled off the desk and somehow landed inside it, which was the kind of thing that happened in old houses with slightly uneven floors. The folder was manila, unmarked on the outside. She would have left it alone except that when she picked it up to retrieve the stapler, it came open and she saw the header of the first document inside. Vestmore Capital. Confidential Settlement Agreement. Executed November 14th. She knew Vestmore Capital. It was in the files Logan had given her for the Geneva preparation. A competitor, mid-sized, aggressive, mentioned twice in the margins of the partnership documents as a company that had been circling the Hartman deal from the outside. She sat down at the desk with the folder in her hands and told herself to close it. She didn't close it. The settlement agreement was 22 pages. She read all of them. It took her 40 minutes, and by the end she understood several things she hadn't understood before. She understood that the competitor Claire had worked with, the company that had taken Logan's contracts and cost him 2 years in the European market, had been a subsidiary of Vestmore. She understood that the settlement had been reached 4 years ago, and that Logan had accepted terms that were, by any reasonable measure, significantly below what he could have pursued in court. She understood why. The alternative involved a public proceeding that would have exposed Lily to the coverage of a story that had Logan Hayes' betrayal and his daughter's name in the same headline. He had taken less than he was owed to keep his daughter's name out of it. He had never told anyone this. The settlement had confidentiality clauses in both directions. She found behind the settlement a smaller envelope. Inside the envelope was a photograph and a handwritten note. The photograph was of Lily, 2 years old, sitting on what looked like a back porch somewhere, holding a stuffed rabbit and looking at something off camera with an expression of complete, unselfconscious delight. The handwritten note was in Claire's writing. Emily had never seen Claire's writing before, but it was dated from 4 years ago, and it said, "This is the only thing I'm actually sorry for, just that. Nothing else." Emily put everything back in the folder, carefully, in the same order she'd found it. She put the folder back in the drawer. She retrieved her stapler. She sat at the desk for a long time. She thought about what it meant to make a decision like that. To accept a settlement that protected your daughter at the cost of your own justice and never tell anyone you'd done it. To carry that for 4 years and let people think you were just unlucky. Just a cautionary tale. Just a brilliant man who'd trusted the wrong person. She thought about the photograph of the laughing man on Constance's piano. She thought about a word that sat somewhere between guest and home. She thought about what she was going to do with what she knew. She thought about what Hartman had said. It is a significant responsibility to be trusted by someone like that. She hadn't understood then the full weight of it. She was beginning to understand it now. She didn't tell him what she'd found. Not the Tuesday, not the Wednesday after, not through the week that followed when December settled over Chicago and the house took on the particular quality of winter. Radiators ticking, the smell of Rose's cooking, Lily's boots by the front door leaving small muddy crescents on the mat that no one mentioned because they had become, quietly, a feature rather than a problem. Emily carried the knowledge of that folder the way you carry something fragile in a coat pocket, constantly aware of it, adjusting her movements around it, not sure yet if it was hers to handle or someone else's to give. She watched Logan differently after Geneva. Not suspiciously. She'd moved past suspicion weeks ago without noticing. She watched him the way you watch something you've finally understood the true shape of, with a kind of recognition that changed everything and couldn't be undone. She watched him at dinner on Thursday when Lily announced, with the gravity of a person delivering a scientific finding, that the capital of Rhode Island was Providence, which most people didn't know because they assumed it was Newport, which was wrong and also embarrassing for those people. Logan said without looking up from his food, "Newport has never been the capital of Rhode Island." "I know," Lily said. "That's what I just said." "So who are these people you're embarrassing?" "Hypothetically." "Name one." Lily considered this. "Tyler from school said it was Newport. Tyler from school is 8. So am I. Then you're both working with limited information, and neither of you should be embarrassed." Lily thought about this for a moment. "That's actually fair," she said, with the tone of someone making a significant concession. Emily watched Logan almost smile into his fork and thought about a photograph of a 2-year-old with a stuffed rabbit and a handwritten note, and a man who had absorbed a loss quietly for 4 years so that his daughter's name stayed out of it. She thought, "I love him." She thought it the way you think things that have been true for a while before you say them, arriving at it not like a revelation, but like a destination you've been walking toward without admitting you knew the way. It sat in her chest with a specific weight, and she held it there, and didn't speak it, and watched Lily argue with her father about Rhode Island, and understood that she was in the middle of something she hadn't planned for and couldn't plan her way out of. The month 3 payment arrived on December 22nd, $100,000, as contracted, deposited into her account with the automated precision of a business arrangement, doing exactly what it said it would. She stared at the notification on her phone for a long time. Her mother's procedure had gone well. The roof in Rockford was scheduled for February. Marcus had cut back his night shifts to twice a week. The numbers that had defined the shape of her fear for years were moving, slowly, but moving. The contract was half over. She put the phone down and went to find Lily, who was in the living room constructing something elaborate out of a set of architectural blocks Constance had given her for her birthday, and explaining the structural reasoning behind her choices to no one in particular. "Is it a building?" Emily said. "It's a load-bearing hypothesis," Lily said. "Of course it is." She sat on the floor beside Lily and handed her blocks when she needed them, and didn't think about the phone notification, and was mostly successful. Christmas was Constance's. The whole family went, Logan, Emily, Lily, and a collection of cousins, and an uncle named Frank, who talked about golf for 40 minutes before anyone could redirect him. Emily had braced for the performance of it, the careful maintenance of the story in front of 20 people who all loved Logan with the particular complex love of people who had watched him be hurt, and had never quite forgiven themselves for not preventing it. What she hadn't braced for was how little performance it required. She sat next to Constance during the after-dinner part of the evening, in the sitting room while the cousins played a card game, and Lily had fallen asleep in an armchair with a book on her chest, and Logan was in the kitchen with his Uncle Frank, apparently unable to escape the golf conversation after all. "She trusts you," Constance said, looking at Lily. "She trusts everyone who knows state capitals," Emily said. "She didn't trust Claire until 8 months in," Constance said. "She let you carry her library card after 2 weeks." Emily looked at Lily's sleeping face. The glasses had slid down her nose. Someone should fix them, but she looked so peaceful that no one had. "Constance," Emily said. What was he like before?" She paused. "Not the laughing in the photograph. After that, when he was building the company. Before Claire." Constance was quiet for a moment. "Driven," she said, "but not the way he is now. The way he is now, the drive has a kind of armor around it. Then it was just energy. He wanted things. He let himself want them." She picked up her tea. "He was the kind of person who made plans and told you about them. Not because he needed advice, just because he was excited." She looked at Emily. "He doesn't make plans out loud anymore. He just executes them." "He's going to take Lily to see the Grand Canyon," Emily said. "In the spring." Constance looked at her. "He told you that?" "He mentioned it." "He's never—" Constance stopped. He's been saying maybe next year to her for 2 years. I know, Emily said. I told him to book it. Constance set down her tea. She looked at Emily for a long moment, with the forensic warmth she'd deployed since the first day. The look that assessed and loved simultaneously, that didn't let you get away with anything, that had the specific gravity of a woman who had earned everything she knew. You know I'm going to ask, Constance said. I know. How real is this? Emily looked at her hands. She thought about 34 pages and a month 3 payment and the distance she'd been trying to maintain since October and how well that had worked out for her. Real enough that I can't stop it, she said. Whether it's real in the way that, whether it becomes something, she stopped. I don't know. He hasn't. No, Constance said. He wouldn't. Not first. He's not built that way anymore. I know. He'd need someone to show him it was safe. Constance looked at her son through the kitchen doorway. Someone who didn't need anything from him except him. Emily followed her gaze to Logan, who was standing at the kitchen counter with a cup of coffee, apparently having successfully escaped the golf conversation, looking out the window at the winter backyard with an expression that, at this distance, was just a man being quiet in a house full of people he loved. She looked away. I don't want to hurt him, she said. And then, because that wasn't all of it, I don't want to be hurt. Those aren't the same problem, Constance said. They just feel like it. January came in cold and unforgiving, which was January's job in Chicago, and which it performed with its usual lack of sentiment. The Hartman partnership moved into formal documentation. Logan was in back-to-back contract negotiations, coming home reliably at 8, sometimes 8:30, eating whatever Rosa had left and working another hour before the house went quiet. Emily watched the tiredness accumulate in him across the month. Not dramatically. He didn't collapse or complain or show the strain in any way that was legible to anyone who wasn't paying close attention. But she was paying close attention, and she saw it in the way he held his coffee cup in the morning, slightly tighter than usual, and the way his answers got shorter without getting sharper, which was different from his normal economy of words. Normal Logan was concise. January Logan was running on a battery that wasn't fully recharging. On a Friday evening in the 3rd week, she came downstairs at 10 to find him at the kitchen table with his laptop and papers spread around him, and a cold cup of coffee that had been forgotten 2 hours ago. She made a fresh pot without asking. She set it in front of him. She sat down across the table with her own cup and her laptop, and she worked, quietly, on a Prism Group proposal that was due Monday. She didn't ask if he needed company. She just provided it. He didn't say anything for 20 minutes. Then he said, without looking up from his screen, the secondary clauses in the Hartman contract are going to push the close to late March. Okay, she said. That's past the... He stopped. I know, she said. He looked up. We can renegotiate the contract terms, she said carefully. If the partnership close is the trigger for termination, and it moves... That's not what I was going to say, he said. She held her coffee cup. What were you going to say? He looked at her. In the late-night kitchen with the papers around him and the city quiet outside, he looked like someone who had arrived at an edge he'd been avoiding for months and found it closer than he'd calculated. I don't know, he said. It was the most honest thing he'd said to her that wasn't about work or Lily or history. She nodded slowly, like acknowledging a fact. She went back to her laptop. He went back to his. They stayed that way for another hour, and when she went to bed, she lay in the dark and thought about edges and timing and the particular cruelty of arrangements that were designed to end. The thing that changed everything came from outside the house, which was, in retrospect, exactly where it would have to come from. His name was Richard Voss. She found out about him the way people find out about threats they didn't see coming, suddenly, all at once, after the fact. On a Tuesday morning in the last week of January, Diana Yoon called Logan before 7, and Emily heard his side of the conversation from the hallway, which told her enough. When? He said. And then, how much of it? And then, in a voice that was very quiet and very level in the specific way that meant he was working to keep it that way, get the legal team in at 9. He came downstairs 15 minutes later. Emily was in the kitchen. He stopped in the doorway. There's going to be a news cycle, he said. About what? About you. He looked at her steadily. Richard Voss is a business rival. He runs Vestmore Capital. She already knew the name. She kept her face neutral. He's been watching the Hartman deal since it started moving, Logan said. He tried to get into the partnership twice and was declined both times. Logan stopped. He's given a story to a financial news outlet. It publishes tomorrow morning. What story? That our arrangement, he stopped again. That you were hired. That you're a paid actress. That I manufactured a relationship to close the Hartman deal, and that you're a woman with no professional standing who was brought in to deceive an elderly investor. His voice stayed level. It frames you as someone who targeted me for financial gain. The phrase they're apparently using is, gold digger, Emily said. His jaw tightened. Yes. She put down her coffee cup. She felt something cold move through her chest. Not panic, not quite. The particular clarity that came when something you'd been afraid of finally arrived and revealed its actual shape. How much of it is verifiable, she said. The contract exists. Our attorneys use standard confidentiality, but Voss has resources. The payment records. He looked at her. He knows about the payment structure, not the amounts, but the staged nature of it. Who talked? We don't know yet. He moved into the kitchen, stopped at the counter. He had the expression of a man standing in a room where something had just caught fire and was doing the math on exits. Emily, I need to... The legal team is going to advise that I distance myself from you publicly. Issue a statement. It would be the cleanest way to protect the Hartman deal, she said. Yes. She looked at him. He was looking at the counter. Is that what you want to do? She said. He didn't answer. Logan. She waited until he looked at her. I'm asking what you want, not what the legal team advises, not what protects the deal. What do you want to do? The silence lasted long enough to be its own kind of answer. She nodded, once, and picked up her coffee cup. She felt the thing in her chest adjust. Not break, just shift, settling into a shape she recognized from 30 years of learning that wanting and having were different problems. I understand, she said. It's a business decision. The partnership is... That's not... He pushed back from the counter. Don't do that. Do what? Make it easy for me to be wrong. His voice had an edge she hadn't heard before. Not anger exactly, something rawer. Don't just... I'm trying to think clearly. Then think clearly, she said, but don't think for too long. The story runs tomorrow. He looked at her with an expression that was doing several things at once. The calculation and the feeling and the fear, all of it visible in a way it almost never was. Like the managed surface had cracked along a fault line she hadn't known was there. If I don't distance myself, he said, and the deal falls through. I know what it costs, she said. I know the full number. I read all the files, remember? She looked at him steadily. I'm not asking you to sacrifice the partnership. I'm asking what you want. He said nothing. She put her cup in the sink, rinsed it, set it on the rack. I'm going to call my attorney, she said. Let me know what you decide. She went upstairs. She sat on the bed and called Gloria Rice, who picked up on the second ring and listened to the situation in the exact silence of someone filing everything in the right place. Can they prove the arrangement? Gloria said. They can prove the payments. The contract is confidential, but Voss has resources. The framing is defamatory, Gloria said. The gold digger narrative said, if the actual arrangement was a legitimate business contract, they're mischaracterizing it. The arrangement was exactly what it sounds like when you describe it badly, Emily said. I moved into his house and attended events as his fiancée in exchange for money. The fact that it was a contract doesn't make it sound better in a headline. Gloria was quiet for a moment. No, she said, it doesn't. A pause. What does Hayes want to do? I don't know yet. Emily, Gloria's verdict voice. Whatever he decides, you have rights here. You have a contract and a legitimate claim, and you don't need him to protect you. You can protect yourself. I know. Do you? She looked at the wall. I know it intellectually, she said. Gloria made a sound that was almost a sigh. Call me when you know what he's decided. She hung up and sat with the phone in her hands. She thought about the way Logan had said, don't make it easy for me to be wrong. She turned this over. It meant something. It was the kind of thing you said when you were trying to talk yourself into the wrong choice, and someone was failing to help you do it. It was the language of a man who knew what he should do and was afraid of it. Afraid for the same reason he'd been afraid for 4 years. She went back downstairs at noon. Logan was in the study, on a call. She could hear the low register of his voice through the closed door. Not the words, just the tone, which was the controlled professional tone and not the kitchen at 10 p.m. tone, and that told her something. She went to the kitchen and made lunch for Lily, who was home because of a teacher development day and had been reading in the living room with the disciplined focus of a person who had decided to be somewhere else emotionally while the adults sorted things out. Lily had an instinct for the weather of a house. She always had. Emily brought her a sandwich. Lily looked up, pushed her glasses up, assessed. "Is it bad?" Lily said. Emily sat down in the armchair across from her. "There are people saying things about me. Some of them will be on the news." Lily held this with the serious, careful attention of a child who had learned not to flinch from hard things. "What are they saying?" "That I don't belong here," Emily said. "That I'm here for the wrong reasons." Lily was quiet for a moment. "Are you?" "No," Emily said. Lily looked at her for a long moment with the same assessing gaze she'd had since the beginning, the one that had softened, layer by layer, over 3 months, but which still had the precision of a child who had been wrong about a person before and knew what that cost. "I know," Lily said. She said it the way she'd first said Emily's name in the doorway, plain and deliberate, no cushioning around it. Emily looked at the sandwich in Lily's hands and the book on her lap and the glasses that were always slightly too large, and she thought, whatever he decides, I cannot lose this. Not the house, not the arrangement, not the contract. This. This particular 8-year-old who had given her a library card as an act of trust and never asked for it back. The study door opened at 2:15. Logan found her in the kitchen. He stood in the doorway and looked at her with the expression he'd had at the kitchen table in January. The edge he'd been avoiding now fully arrived. "I called Diana," he said. "Okay." She said the same thing the legal team said. "Distance myself. Statement. Control the narrative." He came into the kitchen, stopped in the middle of it. She also said... He stopped. "What?" "She said she'd never seen me bring anyone to a work trip in 4 years. She said she'd never seen me..." He looked at his hands. "She said I look different since October." Emily said nothing. "I'm not good at this," he said. "I want to be clear that I know that. I don't do this well. I never did it especially well, and then I did it catastrophically once, and I've been..." He stopped again. Exhaled. "I've been standing very still ever since, because standing still felt like the same thing as being safe." "It's not," she said. "I know that now." He looked at her. "I've known it for a while. I just didn't want to..." "Logan, I'm not going to issue a statement," he said. "I'm not going to distance myself from you. If the deal falls through because Voss burned it down, then I'll rebuild it. I've rebuilt things before." His voice was steady, but not calm, the particular quality of steadiness that came from deciding something and meaning it. "I'm not doing to you what was done to me. I'm not letting someone else's agenda determine what I..." He stopped. "I'm not letting fear make this decision." She looked at him. "You might lose the partnership," she said. "You should know I understand what that means, and I'm not asking you to..." "You're not asking me to do anything," he said. "That's the point." He crossed the kitchen in 4 steps and stopped in front of her, close enough that she could see the exact expression on his face. And the expression was not the managed CEO face, or the careful father face, or the Geneva dinner face. It was just a face. A tired, decided, slightly scared face belonging to a person who had finally stopped standing still. "You've never asked me for anything that wasn't in the contract." "I asked for the car allowance," she said. Something broke open in his expression. The almost smile finally fully arrived, unguarded and real and slightly wrecked around the edges. "Gloria's idea," he said. "Obviously." He looked at her. She looked at him. The kitchen was very quiet. "Emily," he said. "Don't say it if you're going to take it back," she said. Not hostile, just honest. The directness she'd stopped apologizing for at 27, in the service of the truest possible thing. "I'm not going to take it back," he said. "You were going to, this morning." "I know." He didn't look away. "I'm sorry." She held his gaze for a moment, then she said quietly, "I found the folder." He went still. "The settlement with Vestmore," she said. "The photograph of Lily, the note." She held his gaze. "I found it 3 weeks after Geneva. I've been carrying it since then." He said nothing for a long moment. The muscle in his jaw moved once. "You didn't say anything," he said. "It wasn't mine to say anything about. It's yours." She looked at him. "But I need you to know that I know, and I need you to know that it—" She stopped, rearranged herself. "You let them pay you less than you were owed to keep her name out of it. You did that quietly, and you never told anyone, and you've been carrying it for 4 years." She felt something tighten in her throat that she controlled before it became anything. "That's the truest thing about you. Not the company, not the deal, not the buildings with your name on them. That." He looked like a man who had been reached in a place he'd walled off so long ago he'd forgotten it was still tender. "Lily doesn't know," he said. "She doesn't need to. Not yet." Emily held his gaze. "But you should stop punishing yourself with it. Whatever you've been using it for. Proof that you were wrong. Proof that you can't trust your own judgment. You can stop." He exhaled. "You're very alarming," he said, and his voice was rough and quiet. "You've mentioned that. I mean it more than before." The kitchen held them both for a moment. Outside, the January wind moved along the side of the house, and somewhere upstairs a door opened and Lily's footsteps moved down the hall toward the top of the stairs and then stopped. A child who knew, instinctively, when to wait. Logan reached out and put his hand on the side of Emily's face. Not a performance, not a transaction, just a man touching the face of a person he'd stopped pretending he didn't need. And said, with the careful precision of someone who had spent 4 years being afraid of this exact sentence, "I'm in love with you." She let out a breath. "I know," she said. "I've known for a while." And I'm in love with you back," she said. "I've been trying not to be, and it didn't work." His hand moved slightly against her face. "How long?" "Library Thursday in November," she said, "when Lily told me about the card tricks." Something moved across his expression that she had no good word for, relief and grief, and something that was just open, like a window that had been stuck and had finally given. "That's specific," he said. "I'm a specific person." The footsteps at the top of the stairs resumed, careful, deliberate, the sound of a child deciding to come down. They stepped apart. Not apart, just to a distance that was still close, that didn't pretend anything had not just happened. Lily appeared at the kitchen doorway in her fox sweater, glasses slightly crooked, book under her arm. She looked at them. She looked at her father. She looked at Emily. She pushed her glasses up. "What's the capital of Vermont?" she said. "Montpelier," Emily said. Lily nodded once, the nod of a person who has confirmed something she already knew but needed to verify anyway. She went to the refrigerator, got herself a glass of water, and went back down the hall without comment. Logan watched her go. "That was her version of okay," he said. "I know," Emily said. "I speak Lily." He looked at her with the expression that was not a recalibration anymore. It was something settled, something that had finally found its right shape. "The story runs tomorrow," she said. "Yes." "What are we going to do about it?" He looked at her steadily. "We're going to let it run," he said. "And then we're going to respond to it honestly. No statement, no distancing. The truth." He paused. "All of it, if necessary." "That might cost you the deal." "It might." He didn't look away. "I've rebuilt things before. I've never rebuilt them with someone worth keeping." She thought about 43 years of marriage and a man who had never walked away from a commitment. She thought about 3 generations of things built and held. She thought about what Hartman had said about trust. She thought about a 34-page contract and the thing it hadn't accounted for, the thing no contract had language for, the particular, inconvenient, irreversible truth of 2 people deciding, in a kitchen in January, that they were not walking away. The story ran the next morning. The headline read, "Hayes Global CEO's Mystery Fiancée Paid Actress or Calculated Deception." By 9 a.m., her name was trending. By 10, 3 investor representatives had called Logan's office. By 11, Logan's attorney was fielding calls from Hartman's team. By noon, Emily was sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop and her phone and a cup of coffee that had gone cold, reading what the internet had decided she was, and Logan was standing beside her reading the same things, and neither of them was pretending the other wasn't there. "It's bad," she said. "Yes," he said. "Your investors are scared." "Yes." She looked up at him. "Are you?" He thought about it honestly, which she had come to understand was the only way he thought about anything. "No," he said. "Not of this." She looked back at the screen. She thought, this is the part where it falls apart. She knew this part. She'd grown up in the version of life where the thing you needed most was the thing that was taken when the pressure arrived. She'd spent 30 years building competence and independence as armor against exactly this, the moment when something good revealed itself to be conditional. She was waiting for Logan to become conditional. He put a cup of fresh coffee in front of her, took the cold one away, and said, "I have a call with my attorneys at 1. After that, I want to talk through the response." The response. "The true one," he said. "The full one." He looked at her. "I told you in October that I needed someone who had a clear, finite reason to want the money. What I didn't tell you, what I didn't know yet, was that I needed someone who could make me remember what it felt like to want something that wasn't the company." He said this like a fact, like a thing he'd worked out and confirmed and was now reporting. She looked at him. He was not conditional. That was the thing that cracked the armor in the end. Not the grand gesture, not the declaration in the kitchen, but this. A cup of fresh coffee and a fact delivered plainly, and a man who was still standing in the room. "Okay," she said. "Okay." "Let's talk through the response," she said. "Tell me what you want to say." He sat down across from her. They talked for 2 hours. And in the house around them, Lily did state capitals to herself in the living room, and Rosa made soup that smelled like winter and something that might have been safety, and the phone kept ringing, and they let it ring, and they kept talking. Two imperfect people building the only thing that actually holds, the truth, spoken out loud, in the specific language of people who have decided to stay. The press conference was Logan's idea, and it was either the bravest thing he'd ever done or the most strategically insane, depending on who you asked. Diana Yoon said both in the same breath on the phone at 7 in the morning 2 days after the story broke. "It's career suicide dressed up as a romantic gesture," she said, with the flat precision she used when she was actually worried. "The investors are already spooked. If you get up in front of cameras and confirm that you hired a fiancé, Hartman pulls out and Voss wins without having to do anything else." "Hartman hasn't pulled out yet," Logan said. "He hasn't called either." "I know." Logan was standing at the window in the study, looking out at the February street. The snow had come overnight, the heavy, wet kind that stuck to everything and made the city look briefly honest. "I'm calling him this morning." A pause. "Logan, I'm not asking for permission, Diana. I'm telling you what I'm going to do so you can prepare for whatever comes after." He paused. "I need you to book the main conference room at the tower for Friday, 2 o'clock. Media access." Another pause. Longer. "You're going to tell them everything," she said. "Yes." "The contract, the payments, all of it." "Yes." "And you think that's going to, what, save the deal? Save her reputation?" "I think," Logan said carefully, "that it's the right thing to do. And I've spent 4 years making decisions based on what was safe instead of what was right. And it's made me someone I don't particularly want to be anymore." Diana was quiet for a moment. Then she said, in a different voice, not the professional one, the other one, "She did something to you." "She showed me something," he said. "That's different." He called Hartman at 8:15. He'd been awake since 5, which was not unusual, but this particular wakefulness had a different quality than his usual kind. It was not the wakefulness of anxiety, but of resolution, the state of a person who has made a decision and is now simply waiting for the moment to act on it. Elsa answered. This was not surprising. Elsa answered most calls to the house, which Logan had come to understand was not secretarial but protective. She was the first filter. "Mr. Hayes," she said, "Heinrich was expecting you to call yesterday." "I needed a day," Logan said. "Yes," she said, without judgment. One moment. Hartman came on the line with the particular quality he always had. Present, unhurried, the voice of a man who had been conducting serious conversations for 50 years and had stopped performing patience because it had long since become actual. "The story," Hartman said. "Yes," Logan said. "I owe you the truth of it." I suspect I already know the broad shape, Hartman said. What I'm more interested in is why. So Logan told him. Not the version he'd been rehearsing, not the legally careful version, the actual one. He told him about October, about a restaurant and a woman with $43 and a bill she couldn't pay, and a man who'd walked out. He told him about the business calculation, the partnership, the specific logic that had produced the arrangement. He told him about the contract. And then, because Hartman deserved the whole thing, he told him about what the contract had become, and why, and what he intended to do about it. Hartman listened through all of it without interrupting once. When Logan finished, the line was quiet for a long moment. The arrangement itself, Hartman said. The contract, you believe this was, what, dishonest? Incomplete, Logan said. I told you a version of my life that was accurate in its facts and misleading in its implications. I let you believe she was something she wasn't. What was she? Logan thought about the kitchen at 10 p.m. and fresh coffee and 2 hours of talking through the true response. He thought about library Thursdays and state capitals and the way she'd said you mattered as plainly as a person reporting the weather. Someone who became real, he said, more real than the arrangement. Another silence. My wife, Hartman said finally, was my secretary for 3 years before I understood what I was looking at. My family thought I had lost my mind when I married her. My father did not speak to me for 4 months. He paused. The Hartman family has been accused of many things over the years. Poor judgment in love is not one of them. A beat. The partnership is not in danger, Mr. Hayes. It never was after the Geneva dinner. I called your attorney 2 days ago. Logan went still. I didn't know that. I know. I told them not to tell you until you'd made your decision. He could hear the old man's gravity through the phone, not unkind, but exact. I wanted to know what kind of man you were when you thought you had something to lose. The answer was satisfactory. Logan sat with this for a moment. Heinrich, he said. Why? Because the deal I'm entering is with a person, not a balance sheet, Hartman said. I needed to know the person. A pause. The woman spoke truly at my table. The rest was detail. He paused again. Take care of her, Mr. Hayes. That kind of honesty is not replaceable. Logan said something that was not quite words and was more than thank you, and Hartman accepted it with the grace of someone who understood that some things didn't need to be spoken at their full volume to be fully heard. He hung up. He sat in the study for a moment. Then he went to find Emily. She was in the kitchen with Lily, who was explaining to her, with great authority, the difference between a hypothesis and a theory, which was apparently something that had come up in school and which several of Lily's classmates had gotten wrong in a way that she found professionally concerning. A hypothesis is what you think might be true, Lily was saying. A theory is what you've already tested and there's evidence for. People say it's just a theory, like it means it's uncertain, but that's backwards. So gravity is a theory, Emily said. Correct. That's going to bother people. It should, Lily said. Bothering people into accuracy is important. Logan stood in the doorway for a moment without announcing himself. He looked at his daughter, her glasses, her fox sweater, the way she leaned forward when she was making a point she considered non-negotiable, and then at Emily, who was leaning her chin on her hand and listening with the focused, genuine attention she gave everything that mattered to her. He thought, I came very close to not choosing this. The thought had a specific weight. He sat with it for the exact amount of time it deserved. Hartman called, he said. Emily looked up. The deal is fine, he said. It was always fine. He called my attorneys 2 days ago. She looked at him for a long moment. He watched her process it, the relief, and underneath it, something more complicated, the particular expression of someone who has been braced for loss and doesn't quite know what to do when it doesn't arrive. He tested you, she said. Yes. Did you pass? Apparently. He came into the kitchen, poured himself a cup of coffee. He also said to take care of you. He was fairly specific about it. Emily looked at the table. She was quiet for a moment in the way that meant she was feeling something she was deciding whether to show. The press conference, she said. You still want to do it? Yes. She looked up. The deal is safe. You don't need to. It's not for the deal, he said. She held his gaze. It's for you, he said. The story is still out there. Your name is still. He stopped. I'm not letting that stand. Not because it threatens the partnership. Because it's wrong, and you don't deserve it, and I have the ability to correct it. She looked at him for a long moment. Lily, she said, without taking her eyes off Logan, can you give us a minute? Lily looked between them with the assessing gaze. Is this a feelings conversation? Yes, Emily said. Okay, Lily said, with the dignity of a person who has accepted that feelings conversations were a necessary feature of human existence, and slid off her chair and went down the hall. Emily looked at Logan. You know that once you do this, she said, there's no version of the story where we're just a business arrangement. People will know what it became. Good, he said. Your investors are adults who have been in business long enough to understand that humans are complicated. He held her gaze. And if any of them can't work with that, I'll find investors who can. She looked at the table. She was quiet for a moment. I spent 3 months trying to maintain the distance, she said. I kept telling myself to remember the contract. I know. I could see you doing it. She looked up. You could? You have a very specific face when you're reminding yourself of a fact you'd rather not deal with, he said. You did it every time Lily asked you something real, and again after our first investor dinner, and about 4 times in Geneva. She stared at him. You never said anything? I was doing the same thing, he said. Different face, same problem. She shook her head slowly, not in disagreement, in the particular way of someone who has realized, belatedly, that 2 people who are both bad at this still manage to end up here. Friday, she said, 2 o'clock. I want to be there. I was counting on it, he said. The press conference was held in the main conference room of the Hayes Global Tower, which had floor-to-ceiling windows and 42nd floor views of the lake, and enough space for the 38 journalists who showed up, because Richard Voss's story had made enough noise that the room was more crowded than any of them had planned for. Emily stood to Logan's left, slightly behind him, in a charcoal gray blazer she'd bought with her own money, because she'd wanted to be wearing something that was hers. Gloria Rice was in the second row. Diana Yoon was against the far wall with her arms crossed, and an expression that suggested she had calculated the odds, and was still not entirely certain about them. Logan walked to the podium and looked at the room. He was not wearing his CEO face. Emily had seen that face often enough to know exactly what it looked like. The slight remove, the performed authority, the careful management of what came through and what didn't. He was not wearing it now. He looked like a person who had made a decision and was standing in the consequences of it, which was different, and which the cameras caught immediately. In October of last year, he said, I offered a woman named Emily Carter a business arrangement. She would act as my fiancée at professional and social events for a period of 6 months, in exchange for financial compensation. We signed a contract. It was her decision to accept, and mine to offer, and both decisions were made freely and with full information on both sides. The room was very quiet. I'm telling you this because a story was published this week that described this arrangement as deception and Emily Carter as someone who had manipulated her way into my life for financial gain. Both characterizations are wrong, and the record needs to be corrected. He paused. The arrangement was real. The contract was real. The financial compensation was real. What the story got wrong, what Richard Voss got wrong, deliberately, because the truth doesn't serve his purposes, is what it became. He paused again. The room held its breath. I'm a private person. I've been private for reasons that were legitimate and that I'm not going to detail in this room. But I'll say this. Emily Carter came into my home as part of a business arrangement, and she became the most honest person I've had in my life in a very long time. Not because she said the right things, because she said the true things, even when they were harder. He looked down at the podium for a moment and then looked back up. And when he did, his gaze went straight to her. I fell in love with her. That's not a business arrangement. That's a separate fact, and it's the most important one. A sound went through the room. Not loud, but distinct. The sound of 38 journalists recalibrating. I'm not asking anyone to be impressed by this, he said. I'm asking for accuracy. Emily Carter is not a gold digger. She's not an actress. She's a 30-year-old woman who agreed to an unconventional arrangement for legitimate reasons and handled it with more integrity than I had any right to expect. He paused. Anyone who wants to pursue the story of Richard Voss's motivations, his twice-rejected applications to the Hartman partnership, his financial relationship with the outlet that ran the story, is welcome to. My legal team will be available after this to provide documentation. He stepped back from the podium. The questions came immediately, overlapping, urgent, the specific chaos of a room full of people who had come in expecting one story and were now holding another. Logan answered 3 questions, directly, without hedging, without the managed vocabulary of public relations. Then he said, "That's all," and walked away from the podium and came to stand beside Emily and put his hand on the small of her back the way he had at that first investor dinner 4 months ago, except that it was not the same gesture at all. Diana Yoon, from across the room, gave Emily a look that communicated with extraordinary compression, something like, "I had my doubts, and I'm revising them." Gloria Rice, from the second row, gave her a look that communicated, "We're going to talk later, and it's going to be a long call." Emily looked straight ahead at the room. She thought, this is real. Not the arrangement. That had been real from the beginning, in its way. This particular standing beside someone, this particular hand, this particular man who had just told 38 journalists the true thing when the safe thing was available and easier and right there. She thought about her mother, who had worked 2 jobs and not complained, and what it would mean to her to hear that her daughter was standing in a room like this, not as someone's accessory or someone's transaction, but as herself. She thought, I should call her tonight. The aftermath of the press conference was not clean. Cleanness, Emily had come to understand, was a myth that people constructed after the fact. You looked back at the moment and removed the mess from it and called it resolution. The actual resolution was messier and slower and involved, in this case, 48 hours of legal back and forth, 2 investor calls that Logan took standing up in the study with his hand pressed flat on the desk, a social media cycle that peaked on Saturday and began declining by Sunday, and a phone call from Richard Voss's attorney on Monday morning that Logan's attorney described afterward as a man beginning to understand the consequences of his choices. The Hartman partnership closed formally on the last day of February, in a ceremony that was mostly paperwork and handshakes, but that Hartman marked by bringing a bottle of wine from his family's private cellar, which Emily later learned he did only for occasions he considered significant. He handed it to Logan and then turned to Emily and said, in English, with the gravity of a man who chose his words the way other people chose their foundations, "You are a good person to build things with." She thanked him. She meant it. She also cried in the car on the way home, which she hadn't planned on, and which she covered by looking out the window at the March city. The snow retreating, the first suggestion of something green returning, the particular Chicago light that came back in spring like it had been somewhere else and was slightly embarrassed about how long it had taken. Logan, who had been watching her not cry for 2 blocks, said, "You can just cry." "I'm not crying. Your face is doing something. My face is minding its own business." Emily. She turned from the window. She was in fact crying. Just barely. The controlled kind that happened when you'd been holding something for a long time and your body decided it was done holding it. She stopped. "I grew up thinking that the best you could hope for was to survive the gap between what you needed and what you had. And then this," she gestured vaguely at the car, the city, everything. "I keep waiting for it to go wrong." "It has gone wrong," he said, "several times. Voss, the press, the investors. And you stayed," she said. "That's the part I can't—" She stopped again. "The people I grew up watching leave when things got hard. It was just what happened. It was like weather." He reached over and took her hand. Not a performance, just a hand. "I'm staying," he said. "I know." She looked at their hands. "That's why I'm crying." He said nothing. She appreciated that he didn't try to fix it. She'd come to love that about him. The capacity to let a thing be what it was, without immediately trying to manage it into something more comfortable. She wiped her face with her free hand. "The Grand Canyon trip," she said. "Did you book it?" "April 17th, he said. 4 days. Lily knows? She has been talking about it every morning since I told her. Yesterday she informed me that the Colorado River carved the canyon over approximately 5 to 6 million years, and that most people don't understand the geological timescale involved. She's not wrong." "She's never wrong," he said, with the particular helpless love of a man who has raised a small, terrifying genius and would not change a single thing about it. "It's exhausting." Emily laughed, a real one, the kind that came out before you decided to have it. He looked at her when she laughed. She'd noticed this, that he looked at her when she laughed, not quickly, but the way you look at something you want to remember. She looked back at the city. Spring was coming. You could feel it in the quality of the light, the particular loosening of the air, the kind of change that doesn't announce itself but arrives anyway, relentless and quiet, making everything slightly more possible than it was. There were things that needed to be said still, practical things, real things, the kind of things that required the contract to be formally concluded and the arrangement to be officially closed before something new could be properly opened. Gloria had already drafted the termination paperwork, which Emily had signed on a Thursday morning at the kitchen table with Logan's coffee untouched beside his laptop and Lily's boots by the door, and Rosa moving around in the background making the sounds that a house made when it had become a home. She had signed it without ceremony, because the ceremony was in the fact of it, the acknowledgement that the 34 pages had done what they were supposed to do and were now complete, and what remained was something that didn't need paper. The ring conversation happened on a Sunday in late March, in the most undramatic possible circumstances, which was at least consistent with how everything real between them had happened. They were doing dishes. Lily was upstairs. Logan was washing, Emily was drying, and they were talking about something inconsequential, whether the corner cafe had gotten better or worse since it changed management, which was the kind of conversation that existed in long domestic stretches and meant nothing and meant everything simultaneously. And then Logan said, in the middle of handing her a wet plate, "I want to marry you." She took the plate, she dried it, she put it in the cabinet. "Okay," she said. He turned to look at her. "Okay?" "Yes." She turned to look at him. "I want to marry you too. I've wanted to for a while, but it felt..." She paused. "Presumptuous." "Presumptuous," he repeated with a particular expression. "You confronted me about a 4-year-old legal settlement and told me to stop punishing myself, and you were worried about being presumptuous. Those were necessary things. This was also necessary," he said. She looked at him. He had dish soap on his wrist and was wearing an old Henley that had lost its shape, and his hair was slightly disordered from running his hand through it earlier when Lily had asked him to explain tectonic plates, and he'd realized he couldn't remember enough to satisfy her. He looked like a person, specifically her person, the one she'd been finding layer by layer for 5 months, the one she hadn't expected and couldn't imagine not having. "Yes," she said. "Okay, yes." "I have a ring," he said. "What?" "In my study, in the drawer." He turned back to the dishes. "I bought it 3 weeks ago. I didn't know when to..." "3 weeks ago?" "I was waiting for the right moment." "You chose dish time." "You have a very threatening library card." She laughed. The real kind, again, the involuntary kind. He was smiling properly now, not the almost smile, but the actual one, which she still didn't see often enough, and which she planned to spend a considerable amount of time producing in the future. "Go get the ring," she said. "Now?" "Logan, go get the ring." He dried his hands. He went down the hall. He came back 2 minutes later with a small box, which he opened without kneeling down or making a speech. He just opened it and held it out to her, and the ring was simple and exactly right. And he said, "It's a real question. I need you to know that." "I know," she said. "Not a contract, not an arrangement." "I know." "I love you," he said, which he'd said several times now, but which still had in it the quality of a man saying something true that he'd been afraid of for a long time. "I love you, and I want you to be my wife, and I want Lily to have you, and I want to stop acting like wanting things is the same as losing them." She took the ring out of the box herself and put it on her own finger, which made him blink. "I've been doing things myself for a long time," she said. "I'm keeping the habit." He looked at her hand. He looked at her face. The Sunday kitchen was warm around them, and the city was doing its March thing, and somewhere upstairs Lily was reading about tectonic plates, or state capitals, or bird migration, and the world was exactly as imperfect and as possible as it had always been. "That's fair," he said. She kissed him, first time without a reason, just the fact of it, and he kissed her back, and it was nothing like the movies. It was slightly awkward because she still had the dish towel in her other hand, and he bumped the counter, and it was exactly right. A year is not a long time in the life of anything built to last, but a year is enough to see the shape of something, to understand what you're actually making, as opposed to what you thought you were making when you started. A year after the press conference, Emily Carter was the CEO of a brand strategy firm called Groundwork, which had started as a concept Logan had suggested over coffee one morning in April, 2 weeks before the Grand Canyon trip. "You've been doing this work for other people for 8 years," he had said. "You know the industry. You know the gaps. You have enough capital now to seed something real." She had told him she'd think about it. She had thought about it for 4 days and then called Marcus, who had immediately said, "Do it. I'll do your social media." "You don't know anything about brand strategy." "I know you," he said. "That's enough to start." He was not wrong. Marcus had joined as creative director 6 months in, after leaving his night shifts behind, and he was, it turned out, extraordinarily good at it. The visual language he brought to Groundwork was the thing that made the firm distinctive, the thing that made clients call them instead of the other way around. Emily had known he was talented. She hadn't quite known the shape of it until she gave him space to use it. Their mother, Patricia, had come to the office opening in September. She had walked through the space, clean lines, good light, a conference table Marcus had designed himself, and she had been quiet for a long moment, and Emily had thought she was going to say something about how far they'd come, the way people did at moments like this, reaching for the language of distance traveled. Instead, Patricia had said, "This looks like you." Just that. It looks exactly like you. Emily had held on to that for a long time. Groundwork had 7 clients by December. It was not yet profitable on its own terms. Logan had seeded it, and Emily had structured the financing as a loan, formal and documented, because she needed it to be hers, and she needed the distinction to be real. She was paying it back at an agreed rate. Logan had accepted the terms without argument, because he understood by now what it meant to her to build something that belonged to her. "You didn't have to structure it as a loan," he said once. "Yes, I did," she said. "Why?" She thought about how to say it. "Because I need to know that what I have is mine, not given to me, not contingent on someone else's decision to stay." She paused. "I love you. I'm going to marry you. But I need to also be a person who can stand up if I need to know I can." He looked at her for a long moment. "I know," he said. "That's why I accepted the terms." She looked at him. "I want you to be able to stand up," he said. "I want that more than I want you to need me." Those are different things. They were. She knew they were. She was still learning some days how to let both things be true at once. To be someone who loved him and needed him, and was also, separately and completely, herself. This was the actual work. Not the company, not the merger, not the press conference. This, the daily negotiation between 2 people who had been alone long enough to calcify into their solitudes and were now, patiently and imperfectly, learning to make room. They were not always good at it. Logan still came home at 8:15 sometimes, and disappeared into the study and forgot to say what was wrong. Emily still caught herself being too independent, too self-sufficient, retreating into competence when she could have just said, "I'm struggling today." Lily still had days when she was 8 years old in the most complicated ways and needed things that neither of them knew how to give perfectly. Rosa still ran the house with the long-suffering practicality of a woman who had seen everything, and occasionally said so. The Grand Canyon had happened in April, and it had been extraordinary in the specific way that things are when they are long promised and finally real. Lily had stood at the south rim with her glasses reflecting the light and the canyon spread out before her, and said nothing for a full 30 seconds, which was the longest she'd ever been quiet, and then said, "It's bigger than the photographs make it." "Most things are," Logan said. Lily thought about this. "Or the photographs are just bad." "Both can be true," Emily said. Lily considered this, then took out the small notebook she'd brought for scientific observations and wrote something down. Emily had looked later at what she'd written. The Colorado River cut through solid rock for millions of years, not because it was strong, because it kept going. She'd taken a picture of it and kept it on her phone. The proposal, the real one, the formal one, the one for the family, happened on a Saturday in May at Maison Éclat. Logan had made the reservation himself and hadn't told Emily where they were going. When the car stopped outside and she saw the building, she sat still for a moment. "You're not serious," she said. "It seemed complete," he said. "Architecturally." "Architecturally?" "As a narrative. You're a billionaire and you're talking about narrative architecture. You've been running a brand strategy firm for 8 months. You talk about narrative architecture in your sleep." She looked at the building. The same glass tower. 42 floors up, the same dining room with the ivory linen and the silverware and the pianist and the city spread out below. "The table is different," she said when they were seated. "It's not the same table." "No," he said. "I checked." She looked at him across the table. He looked back. He was wearing a dark suit, not the charcoal from that first night, but similar, and he had the expression of a man who had thought about this moment and was now inside it, which was different, and which suited him. "October 14th, she said. "The contract date," he said. "I was terrified," she said. "I know, you didn't show it." "I showed it the second you walked away. I sat at that table for 10 more minutes and drank your wine and talked myself through every reason it was a catastrophically bad idea." She looked at the table. "And then I called Marcus and told him everything was going to change." "Was it?" "Yes," she said. "Not in any way I could have predicted." He reached into his jacket and put a small velvet box on the table between them. She looked at it. "You already gave me a ring," she said. "That was a kitchen ring," he said. "This is the restaurant ring. How many rings are there going to be?" "Just the 2, he said. "I had a system." She opened the box. The ring was different from the kitchen one. Older, more formal, the kind of thing that had been in a family. She looked up at him. "My grandmother's," he said. "My mother wanted you to have it. She told me in December, and I've been waiting for the right moment," Emily said. "You've been waiting for the right moment since December." "I was going to do it in January, but then Logan. And then February was the partnership close, and that seemed Logan." He stopped. "Yes," she said. "The answer is yes. It was yes in the kitchen. It was yes in January when I didn't say it. It was probably yes sometime in November, but I was in significant denial." She took the ring out of the box, and he laughed. A real one, the full version, the one she still didn't see often enough, because she put it on herself again. "I told you," she said. "I'm keeping the habit." The pianist was playing something by Bill Evans, the same way he had been the night of October 14th, because some things in good restaurants stayed constant, and consistency, it turned out, was its own kind of love. They had dinner, they talked, they sat in the restaurant where it had started. Not the same people who had sat here in October, but continuous with them, built from them, carrying the memory of that night the way you carry the memory of any place where something real began. At the end of the evening, walking out into the Chicago night, Emily stopped on the sidewalk and looked up at the building. 42 floors, the same windows, the city going on behind them. She thought about a woman who had stood inside this building with $43 and no good options and a closing feeling in her chest, and who had made a decision that was terrifying and practical and completely right without knowing yet that it was right. She thought about what that woman had needed. Not a rescue, not a transaction, not even a plan. She had needed to believe, in the middle of the worst dinner of her life, that something could change. That the version of herself standing at that table was not the final version. That the distance between where she was and where she could be was not fixed. She had not known, on that night, that the distance would be crossed this way. Through a contract and a child and a folder in a desk drawer and a press conference and a canyon at sunrise and a ring in a kitchen and a man who rinsed his own plate and kept an alarm at 7:15 because he needed to say goodbye before school. You don't know, when you're standing at the edge of something, what crossing it will cost or what it will build. You only know the edge. You only know the particular quality of the fear that comes with standing at one. And then you cross anyway, because the alternative is standing still forever, which is its own kind of loss. Logan took her hand on the sidewalk. "Ready?" he said. She looked at the city. The October city had been burning gold. The May city was something else, softer, more certain of itself, knowing it had made it through the cold. "I've been ready," she said. "You were the one who took a while." "I was thorough," he said. "You were scared," she said. "Yes," he said. "That too." She looked at him. This man who had been lonely for 4 years and careful for longer than that, who did card tricks he couldn't land and kept an alarm he didn't need, and once spent 4 months negotiating with himself over a ring, who had sat across from her in a restaurant on the worst night of her year and offered her something that looked like a transaction and turned out to be the rest of her life. "I know," she said. "Me too." They walked down the sidewalk toward the car. Behind them, the tower rose 42 floors into the May sky, and inside it the pianist finished his set and the ivory linen was gathered for the night and the last of the candles went out. And somewhere on the north side of the city, in a red brick house on a tree-lined street, an 8-year-old girl who had given a stranger her library card as an act of trust woke from a dream about canyons and looked at the ceiling and listened to the house. She heard the front door open. She heard 2 voices, low, familiar, the sounds of people who had learned each other. She adjusted her glasses. She got up, padded to the top of the stairs, and looked down. Logan and Emily were in the hallway below. He was hanging up her coat. She was saying something too quiet to hear. He laughed. The real one. She laughed back. Lily observed this for a moment. Then she went back to her room, got into bed, and picked up her notebook from the nightstand. She found the page from the Grand Canyon, the one about the river. She read it once. Then she wrote, underneath it, in the careful handwriting of a child who understood the weight of words. Also, some things take a long time. That doesn't mean they're not on their way. She closed the notebook. She went back to sleep. The house settled around all of them. The woman who had learned that needing someone was not the same as losing yourself. The man who had learned that standing still was not the same as being safe. And the girl who had known, from the very first capital city, that this was always going to be the answer. They had not been looking for a family. They had been looking for other things: money, protection, partnership, distance, safety. And in the looking, in the long and imperfect and frequently terrifying process of it, they had found something they hadn't put on the list, which is, it turns out, how most of the real things happen. Not by design, not by contract, just by staying in the room long enough to find out what was actually there.